FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 451, the second half of the incident. How should I know? Hearing Roan's question, Pietro cursed out loud. He said angrily that the three of them didn't know who the woman who was replaced in the villa was, and that the woman had been in single-line contact with the employer. Pietro and the other two had questioned this, but the employer said that they either believed the woman was fine or quit the mission. The three people who were short of money looked at each other and felt that the commission after the mission was successful was more important. Pietro continued, that night, the three of us drove around the surveillance according to the plan and arrived at the periphery of the villa. First, the woman found a way to insert the USB flash drive prepared in advance in the monitoring room, and I used it to invade the villa's surveillance system and replaced the surveillance with a replay video. After the success, we drove the car to the southwest corner of the villa. I stayed in the car and turned on the signal jammer to prevent anyone from calling the police. Hubert and Daryl sneaked into the villa from under the barbed wire and stole things according to the list. But Daryl and Hubert never expected that they successfully sneaked into the villa, but in the process of stealing things, they found that everyone in the villa had lost their breath. Seeing that more than 20 people were all dead, Hubert and Daryl were shocked. The two who had grown up together looked at each other and understood each other's intentions and gave up the mission. The two did not take anything, quickly erased the traces of entering the villa, got out of the barbed wire, and returned to the car, pushed Pietro away, turned off the signal jammer, and drove away from the area quickly. Afterwards, they contacted the employer, but the employer lost contact, and the three of them immediately cursed. Fortunately, they did not lose money on this trip, because the employer originally expected to give Henry $100,000, and Pietro and the other two intercepted half and only gave Henry $50,000. After Pietro finished his narration, Chenia frowned and looked at Roan. Roan was silent for a few seconds and asked, "What do you mean when you said that the employer asked you to steal some things? Are there many target items?" "A lot." Pietro nodded heavily, indicating that the employer listed more than a dozen items. Among the valuables were Pranaodel's fingerprints, photos of the safe and Pranaodel's study from all angles, an ivory sculpture in the upper right corner of Pranaodel's study, and some documents at the bottom of Pranaodel's desk. In addition to things related to Pranaodel himself, there were also items from Pranaodel's two daughters-in-law, as well as items from 6 guests who stayed overnight, such as fingerprints, bracelets, necklaces, keys, rings, etc. There were a lot of things, nearly 20 in total. So that night, Daryl and Hubert both sneaked into the villa with bags on their chests, giving people the feeling that they were buying goods. X2 Chanel's mouth twitched when she heard this, and Roan was speechless. He continued to ask Pietro a few questions, and then the two got up and left the interrogation room. In the corridor, Chenia looked at the small notebook in her hand that recorded the interrogation content, raised her head and asked, "What should we do next?" Roan rested his chin on his hand and pondered for a few seconds, then turned and walked towards the other two interrogation rooms. "Continue the interrogation and see if there is any difference between Hubert and Daryl's description and Pietro's." "No problem." 3 hours later, at 4:30 in the afternoon, Roan and Chenia finished the interrogation of Daryl and Hubert. The content of the interrogation of these two people was similar to that of Pietro, and the general direction was the same. That is, they found the dead people when they entered the villa, and then quickly ran away. However, there were some differences in small details, such as Hubert and Daryl did not actually return empty-handed. They looted the cash on the dead in the villa, as well as the high-end cosmetics that a daughter-in-law of Pranaodel had just bought and had not used. Because a woman Daryl knew was about to have a birthday, Daryl planned to use the cosmetics to give the woman a birthday surprise. Luo An had been using his emotional perception in his mind all the way, and after several inquiries, he was sure that the three people were telling the truth, so he asked these small details. But these small details are of no use at the moment, because it was not Petro and his 3 friends who drugged and killed people, they were just hired thieves. The good news is that we caught the 3 thieves and learned what happened in the second half of the night of the villa tragedy. Holding the interrogation record, Lassie sat on the chair and swayed, with a strange look on her face. The bad news is that we still don't know what happened in the first half of the night of the villa tragedy, who was the person who poisoned, and why that person did it. We still don't know who the employer who placed the order for Petro and the other 2 is. Michelle next to him added, we can't find Henry and his mother Belinda either. I don't know where they are now. Lassie threw the interrogation record aside and sighed. Well, it sounds like there is more bad news. But at least we have the next direction of investigation, which is to find out who the mysterious employer is. Chinia took a sip of the mineral water on the table, looked at Mona who was typing frantically on the keyboard, and asked, Mona, how did you check that website? Before Petro finished the interrogation, Mona opened Petro's laptop and found the criminal website. Then Mona found that if she wanted to log into the criminal website, she only had 2 chances: to enter the account password. Once the wrong password is entered, the account and password will be cancelled on the spot. To obtain a new account, it will not only take a month to review, but also $10,000. The $10,000 is not important. The important thing is that a month is too long, and the special investigation team can't wait. Just as Mona was hesitating whether to try to invade, Roan finished the interrogation and asked Petro to recognize the account and password. Mona successfully logged into the website and found the chat records between Petro and the employer, and then began to track and investigate the identity of the employer. Hearing Chinia's question, Mona didn't raise her head. Her eyes were fixed on the flashing letters and numbers on the computer, and she said coldly, give me some more time. Thank you for your hard work. Chinia nodded, reached out to the table, and picked up a piece of cake bought by Lassie, sat next to Mona and fed her. Mona didn't move her eyes, opened her mouth, and took a bite, and began to eat the cake, while typing on the keyboard. Lassie, who was watching this scene, frowned slightly. She didn't know if it was an illusion. She felt that Chinia, who gave people a cold feeling, and didn't like to talk, seemed to like feeding others. Winslow and Michelle lowered their heads to exchange their views on the case. When they turned around, they found Roan sitting on a chair, frowning and thinking with a piece of paper. He stood up and walked to Roan and asked, Team leader, what are you thinking about? As he spoke, Winslow looked down at the paper Roan held and found that it was a list of items that the employer asked them to steal from the villa, as described by Petro and the other 2. Roan pondered for a few seconds, handed the paper to Winslow, picked up the coffee, and drank it all, frowning and said, I wonder if the real target of the mastermind behind the scenes is not the Odell family at all? What? What do you mean? Hearing this, except Mona, Chinel, Lassie, and Michelle all raised their heads and turned their eyes to Roan. Bang! Winslow seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes moved as he was about to speak. At this moment, Mona suddenly smashed the keyboard and shouted angrily, Fouquet, NSA, National Security Agency, Chapter 452 NSA Phishing, the real purpose of the employer? 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in the temporary office area. Bang! Mona's sudden keyboard tapping startled everyone. Lassie put aside her doubts about Roan's words and turned to ask, Mona, what happened? Damn NSA, National Security Agency. After cursing a few words angrily, she stood up and handed the computer to Roan. Mona said with an unhappy face, Roan, the criminal website that Petro logged into is most likely created by the NSA group. Lassie, Chinel, Winslow, and Michelle were full of question marks. Roan was stunned for a moment and then quickly reacted, is it used for phishing? Very likely. Mona nodded heavily, indicating that she had just tried to use some means to bypass the firewall, to log into the website backend and find the employer's computer IP and other information. As a result, Mona found that the underlying architecture model of this criminal website gave her a very familiar feeling. Before she could think carefully, someone suddenly tracked Mona in reverse. Mona had just logged into the underlying structure of the website and had not yet carried out any sabotage actions. The other party did not use more direct means at the first time, so Mona had the opportunity to take advantage of this opportunity to invade the other party. But just when Mona was about to succeed, a powerful third party suddenly appeared, not only cutting off Mona's intrusion structure, but also almost successfully invading Mona's computer, forcing Mona's computer to report its location to the other party. That group of new third parties must be NSA. Mona bit her back teeth and said that she would never make a mistake in identifying the other party. When she had just joined the FBI and was still in the 5th investigation team, she was beaten back by the group of people in the NSA several times. Mona was very familiar with the other party's network style. Moreover, the structure of this criminal website was exactly the same as some websites built by the NSA that Mona had previously invaded. The underlying logic was exactly the same. Mona said that she would never make a mistake. This criminal website was definitely built by the NSA. X4. After listening to Mona's narration, Chanel, Lassie, Winslow, and Michelle were confused, and Luo An nodded thoughtfully. NSA, the Federal National Security Agency, is the largest intelligence department in the federal government. It is responsible for collecting and analyzing foreign and domestic communications data. It is affiliated with the Ministry of Defense and is also known as the National Security Agency. This department is mainly responsible for monitoring radio broadcasts, communications, the internet, and especially military and diplomatic secret communications. 14 years later, the Federal National Security Agency was exposed to have implanted monitoring software in 100,000 computers around the world. World-renowned companies such as Samsung and Dell have not escaped its clutches. At this time, the time has just come to 2006. Computers have not yet developed to the prosperous level of later generations, but the means of establishing criminal websites, attracting criminals to settle in, monitoring the other party at all times, and catching them all at the critical moment, have already been used by the CIA. It is normal for the NSA to follow suit. In later generations, some of the legendary deep web and dark web are actually 80% under surveillance. Some people who don't know the reason have just placed an order, and then the FBI, NSA, and even the CIA will come knocking on the door, reaching out and grabbing Mona, who was furious, and pulling her to sit on a chair. Roan chuckled and handed her a piece of cake, saying that he would contact the NSA later, and would definitely get the employer's information from the NSA. But we need to investigate another matter first. Picking up the list of items stolen by Petro and his team requested by the employer, Roan distributed the paper to everyone and explained, "I have been wondering why the employer wanted Petro and his team to steal so many things." The list provided by Petro and his team was several pages long, with a wide variety of samples, and they only missed taking away the clothes of those people in the villa. Winslow was the first to react and said in a deep voice, "You mean, the employer's real target may be just one of these items in the list, or even just one of them? The reason why he wrote so much is just to cover up his real purpose?" After the voice fell, Lassie suddenly realized, clapped her hands, and continued, "According to what Petro and the other two said, their original plan was just to stun the people in the villa. If the plan goes well, those people will wake up the next day and see that one of their items is missing. They may panic and speculate, but when they see that everyone's items are missing, this person will be relieved." Michelle next to him also figured out the logic of the matter and added, "And there are many things missing, and the types are diverse, which will cause great trouble to the law enforcement agencies that come to investigate." "That's right." Roan nodded, then pointed to the papers in the hands of the agents and said, "Everyone, I will contact the NSA to find out the identity information of the employer later. Next, you will investigate these items in the list, connect them with the owner of the item, and see if any of the items have special functions." At this point, Roan paused, then looked at Mona and Michelle and said, "In addition, you two should carefully check the information of the 6 guests other than the Odell family, as well as the chef, driver, maid, etc. See if any 2 or more than 3 of them have a common connection with a certain person or organization." "No problem." All the agents nodded and went to their positions to start working. Luo An picked up the cake on the table and ate it in a few bites, then walked to the balcony with his mobile phone. The NSA, National Security Agency, is the agency that employs the most PhDs in mathematics, computer science, and linguists in the world, and is also one of the most mysterious intelligence agencies in the Federation. Because it is too mysterious and even completely unknown to other departments of the federal government, its abbreviation NSA is often jokingly called no such agency. Luo An has been in the Federation for so long, and has never had any contact with the people in this department. The only indirect contact was the Lydia incident a long time ago. Chapter 48. However, Luo An is not familiar with the NSA, but some people are very familiar with the NSA, such as Mr. Clement and Elmer, the head of the ICE. After all, the latter is from the ICI, Internal Revenue Service Vehicle Investigation Division, and he has some face wherever he goes. However, team leader Elmer pays more attention to money, and this case has little to do with them, so Roan went to the balcony and took out his mobile phone and called Verinus first. During his vacation some time ago, Roan once invited Verinus to have a simple meal on a weekend night to build a relationship. Although Roan and Verinus have a lot of phone calls on weekdays, seeing is believing, and having the opportunity to chat in person is definitely much better than chatting on the phone. Good evening, sir. The call was quickly connected. Roan stood on the balcony and looked at the beautiful night view in the distance. He smiled and started chatting with Verinus. The two chatted briefly for a while, and Roan led the topic to the case he was handling now. NSA. After listening to Roan's narration, Lassie Verinus, who was far away in New York, was wearing a grey close-fitting warm shirt. She sat lazily on a chair, frowned slightly, thought about it, and quickly agreed, and hung up the phone. 10 minutes later, Roan's cell phone rang again. He pressed the answer button and a serious male voice came from the phone. Hello, Team Leader Greenwood. I'm Kotrick, the team leader of the NSA's External Liaison Department. Excuse me, is Mona Evans with you now? Hearing the latter sentence, Roan's eyes narrowed immediately. Chapter 453 Investigating Clues and Finding the Suspect. Since he met Mona, Luo An found that Mona was not a person who was content with her lot. The restlessness here does not refer to Mona's lifestyle or emotions, but the part related to Mona and computers. Mona's computer skills are very good, but they are not among the best in the country of the Federation. Mona has two goals in life. One is to save money, to buy a big villa of her own, and the other is to practice her computer skills to the top and enter the best level. There is no need to elaborate on the first goal. In order to achieve the second goal, Mona has never stopped practicing her computer skills since joining the FBI. The training method is very simple. The federal intelligence system includes 18 member agencies, such as CIA, FBI, NSA, DIA, Federal Defense Intelligence Agency, etc. Mona invaded them one by one. Although she was defeated by the people in those departments, Mona's computer skills have been rising rapidly, and Mona is very happy about this. August, the leader of the number 5 investigation team, felt very headache about this, and the person who had a headache later became Luo An, the leader of the special investigation team. But Mona knew her limits. She only fought with the computer technicians in those departments, and did not do anything too extreme. In addition, Mona's computer skills were rising rapidly, and the special investigation team needed computer talents, so although Roan had a headache, he did not directly prohibit Mona's behavior. Hearing the words of Kotrick, a team leader of the NSA's External Liaison Department, Roan chuckled. Yes, Mona Evans is by my side now. Our special investigation team is investigating a case. She followed my order and investigated a cybercrime website. Roan briefly described the case. Team leader Kotrick on the other end of the phone understood what Roan meant. He was silent for a few seconds, coughed, and said seriously, NSA has also been paying attention to this criminal website, and we have some understanding of the situation inside. We NSA investigated the employer you provided, and we could not find the specific identity of the other party, but we found the network IP and signal source when the other party logged into the website. I can give you these contents. Hearing Kotrick's words, Roan's mouth corner slightly raised. Obviously, the NSA did not admit that they had set up the website for phishing. If Roan wanted to know who the employer was, he had to check it himself. The NSA could only find some basic information. Roan did not care about this. He did not care who the big fish the NSA wanted to catch. Now he just wanted to solve the case in his hands. After getting the information from team leader Kotrick, Roan exchanged a few words with the other party and hung up the phone. Then he hurried back to the room and handed the information to Mona. I knew it. After receiving the information, Mona muttered a few words with an unhappy face, then pulled over her laptop, took a deep breath, and began to type quickly. With the accurate IP and signal source, Mona quickly found the other party's location, a cafe at the end of a street in the southwest corner of Portland, Oregon. Lassie was slightly stunned when she saw this position. So, the employer is the owner of this coffee shop? No. Mona kept typing on the keyboard, and she shook her head and said, I have found out the information of the owner of this coffee shop. The other party is a 63-year-old grandmother. Let's not talk about whether she can use a computer. From her life experience alone, she and her son have no connection with the Odell family and the guests living in the villa. Then Sheku was in the coffee shop when the employer spoke in the criminal network. With his hands folded in front of his chest, Luo An said in a deep voice, the records show that this coffee shop has free internet. It doesn't matter whether the coffee in the coffee shop is good or not. Only with free internet can there be good business. Michelle and Winslow nodded repeatedly. Chinelle looked puzzled, and Lassie was speechless. What you said makes sense, but it's a pity that this coffee shop has internet. But because of customer complaints, the original surveillance video was removed. Amid the crackling sound, Mona said a bad news with a helpless face. Just as Roan and the others were about to speak, Mona changed the subject, smiled slightly, and continued, but there is also good news. Opposite this coffee shop, there is a 24-hour ATM. This ATM records everyone who enters and leaves the coffee shop. While speaking, Mona's computer began to play the flow of people in the coffee shop. Just as Mona was about to investigate these people one by one, Roan suddenly frowned, pointed at the computer, and said loudly, stop. Mona was puzzled. What's wrong? Rewind. According to Roan's words, Mona began to rewind the surveillance video bit by bit. After a few seconds, Roan pointed at a tall man in the surveillance and said coldly, check this guy. Okay. Mona nodded in agreement. Chinelle, Lassie, and Michelle were a little confused when they saw this. Winslow reacted quickly and said, it's the man described by the white old lady downstairs where Hunter and Belinda live. That's right. Roan nodded. When he and Winslow went to Hunter's house to investigate, the white old lady who lived on the first floor of the building said that Belinda and Hunter left the building with a man that night. The old lady didn't see what the man looked like, but the man was taller than Winslow, but thinner than Roan, and he just matched the man who walked into the coffee shop with a computer bag in the surveillance video. I found it. As Michelle logged into the FBI internal database and used facial recognition technology, Mona quickly figured out the identity of the tall man. Hector Jamie, 34 years old, has been in prison for violent assault. Before this incident, Hector Jamie worked as a gardener at Krista's estate for a while. Krista. Roan narrowed his eyes slightly. Krista, 75 years old, was one of the guests who temporarily lived in the villa on the night of the villa tragedy, and was also an old friend of Pranay Odell. I found something here too. As soon as Mona finished speaking, Chinia next to her suddenly raised her hand, handed the list in her hand to Roan, pointed to a red circle in it and said, this is the ruby ring on Krista's neck. It was one of the things that the employer asked Petro and the other two to steal. When I was investigating Krista's information just now, I found that there is a legend in Krista's family that the cross on her neck, combined with a ruby ring in Krista's family, can open a treasure hidden by Krista's ancestors. It is impossible to confirm whether this treasure is true or not, but the cross suddenly disappeared a few years ago. The time when the cross disappeared coincided with the time when Hector Jamie, a gardener, was imprisoned for violent injury. Chinia just finished speaking. Michelle continued loudly, I checked Hector Jamie's recent consumption records. The records show that the day before the villa incident, he happened to take a plane to Las Vegas and went to several casinos to play. On the night of the incident, the consumption records showed that Hector Jamie had gone back to the hotel to rest because he lost money. What a beautiful coincidence. After listening to the three women's narration, Luo An laughed, picked up the coffee on the table, and drank it all, and said loudly, everyone, we have to work overtime tonight. Michelle, book a plane ticket. We will fly to Portland, Oregon. Chapter 454. Discussion among the detectives. Arrest operation. Portland, Oregon. Due to its proximity to the Pacific Ocean, the winter is cold and rainy, and the summer is hot and dry, making this climate suitable for growing roses. Therefore, there are many rose plantations in Portland. Portland is also known as the City of Roses, and has been rated as one of the most livable cities in the Federation for many years. When Luo An led the special investigation team to Portland, it was snowing lightly. The snowflakes made the whole Portland look like a crystal clear new dress, wrapped in silver, fresh and refined. It's so cold. Michelle opened the door and got in the 8-seater black MPV that the local FBI had temporarily borrowed. She distributed the hot coffee she had bought to everyone, then looked at Ron and asked, "When are we going to act?" "Wait a minute." Ron took the hot coffee and thanked him, then pointed to Mona on the passenger seat and said, "Mona is locating Hector Jamie's position." The FBI internal database showed that Hector Jamie was currently working as a chef in the kitchen of a restaurant. Before the action began, it was necessary to confirm where the other party was, whether he was resting at home or working in the restaurant. Michelle nodded, took a sip of the hot coffee, turned around and found Lassie holding the coffee and looking out the window in a daze. Michelle patted Lassie gently and asked with a smile, "What are you thinking about?" Lassie came back to her senses and replied with a smile, "I'm thinking about how to spend the overtime pay after this case is over." Although Lexa Rodell is young, she is a woman who knows how to solve cases. In order to give an explanation to the families of the guests and to wipe off the dirty water on herself, Lexa Rodell is willing to provide the special investigation team with $10 million in special case handling funds. Lexa is also willing to pay an additional $2 million in overtime pay to each member of the special investigation team, and the overtime pay of the team leader has reached $3 million. The salary of FBI agents is not actually high. Every year, up to 9% of FBI agents in San Francisco are forced to resign due to low salaries. Before Lassie and others joined the special investigation team, salary has always been a headache for them. Since following Ron to Los Angeles to join the special investigation team, Lassie's salary has remained the same, but the other gains after each case was solved began to increase rapidly, making Lassie's pocket gradually plump. Michelle is the same, and Chanel and Winslow, who joined the special investigation team not long ago, have the same feeling. Especially Winslow. His previous salary was barely enough for himself, and his ex-wife's current husband is an engineer with an excellent living standard. Winslow has always been embarrassed to see his ex-wife and son. Since joining the special investigation team, Winslow's wallet has started to swell. Money makes people bolder. Winslow began to have the courage to meet his ex-wife and son, and bought a lot of gifts for his son. So when Michelle, Winslow, and Chanel heard Lassie's words, their eyes lit up. They looked at Ron in front of them with gratitude, and then began to discuss their plans after the case was over. Winslow and Lassie's ideas were the same as before, and they still saved up first. Michelle was the same. Something happened to Chanel's parents, so she planned to take a leave after the case was over, and go back to see her parents. It's not a good idea to open champagne at halftime. Everyone, please stop for a moment. After discussing for a while, Luo An suddenly turned around and interrupted them with a smile. "Mona has found Hector Jamie's location. He is in that restaurant." "Okay." The agent stopped talking and nodded in unison. Luo An stopped talking nonsense and waved his hand. "Let's go." The next second, the 8-seater MPV suddenly roared and quickly drove into the driveway. The restaurant where Hector Jamie worked was located on a street in the southwest of Portland. The main dishes were seafood and barbecue. There was a lot of traffic. Even though it snowed today, the restaurant was still bustling with customers. The black MPV slowly stopped at the street entrance across from the restaurant. Ron glanced at the bustling restaurant, then began to check the equipment and arrange the tasks. "Lassie, you and I will go in through the front door to arrest the person. Mona and Michelle, the two of you stay at the front door of the restaurant and be sure to block it if something happens. Winslow and Chanel, the two of you go to the back door and arrest the target person if you find him escaping from there." "Understood." The agents answered in unison. Ron nodded with satisfaction. After checking the equipment, he immediately got out of the car and walked into the restaurant with Lassie. "Hello." Seeing someone push the door in, the restaurant waiter subconsciously walked forward. Roan didn't say much, but took out the FBI's golden badge from his pocket and asked sternly, "FBI, where is Hector Jamie?" "He's in the kitchen." The waitress was stunned for a moment, then took Mona and Lassie to the kitchen. Seeing this, the waiters next to them immediately turned around, apparently intending to find the manager. Roan and Lassie ignored them. It was most important to catch Hector Jamie first. The restaurant's back kitchen was filled with the sounds of burning flames and the chaotic clattering of bowls and pans. Following Roan's instructions, the waitress stood at the back kitchen door and shouted, "Hector, the manager wants to see you." "Okay." As soon as the words fell, a tall and thin man responded instantly. He patted his colleague next to him, handed the unfinished work to him, stood up and walked to the back kitchen door, asking as he walked, "What does the manager want to see me for?" The waitress' eyes moved slightly, and just as she was about to answer, Hector Jamie was stunned for a moment, suddenly grabbed the back kitchen door, and slammed it hard, and turned around, and ran towards the back door of the restaurant without saying a word. Fouquet. Chase. Lassie, who was ambushing at the back kitchen door, cursed. Roan saw this, and kicked the door open, and quickly chased after Lassie. "Get out of the way. Get out of the way. This restaurant is not small." In addition to the back kitchen, there is also a cold storage and a long corridor. Hector Jamie ran towards the back door like a madman, and the pedestrians and boxes on the road were all pulled to the ground by him. Shit. The narrow corridor and the fallen pedestrians and belongings caused a lot of trouble for Roan and Lassie. Lassie cursed loudly, and Roan frowned slightly. Because he was afraid of accidentally hurting passers-by, he did not raise his gun and shoot directly, but continued to chase the other party. Hector Jamie quickly ran to the back door, but as soon as he opened the door, a big fist appeared in front of him. Bang! Winslow, who was lying in ambush, took advantage of Hector Jamie's unpreparedness and punched him in the face. Hector's eyes bulged out instantly, and blood flowed out of his nose instantly. Hector Jamie, who was busy running for his life, gritted his teeth and forced himself to support himself from falling to the ground. He dodged Chenia's second punch. Seeing Winslow standing on the left with a cold face, Hector hurriedly stood up and prepared to run to the right. Bang! Bang! The next second, 2 gunshots rang through the area. Hector Jamie only felt a sharp pain in his two calves, and then fell forward uncontrollably to the ground. Walking out of the back door slowly with Lassie, Roan looked at Hector Jamie, who was on the ground with a painful expression on his face, smiled slightly, and blew on the muzzle of the Glock 18, "Take him away." 3 hours later, in the interrogation room temporarily borrowed by a special investigation team at the FBI branch in Portland. "Good afternoon, Hector Jamie." Roan and Chanel sat down opposite the interrogation table, and without any nonsense, they asked directly, "Where are Henry and his mother Belinda now?" Chapter 455 The truth of the case from the suspect's mouth. In the interrogation room, Hector Jamie, who was shot in both legs, sat in a wheelchair with his hands handcuffed together. After a long silence, he sighed and whispered, "The mother and son should still be alive. They are in the basement of a house in the south of Las Vegas." Chanel in the interrogation room was stunned for a moment when she heard this. Winslow, Mona, Lassie and Michelle, who were observing the interrogation in the monitoring room next to them, were also slightly stunned. After learning that Belinda and Henry, the mother and son, were missing and no clues could be found, the special investigation team had made the worst plan. After all, the murderer had killed 26 people in the villa, not just Belinda and Henry. Knowing that the mother and son might still be alive, Roan frowned and immediately asked, "Where is the specific location of that house?" When Hector Jamie told the specific location, Roan immediately suspended the interrogation, left the room, took out his mobile phone, and called the local FBI in Las Vegas to ask them to help rescue people in that house. After hanging up the phone, Roan walked into the monitoring room and said to Winslow and Lassie, "You two should take a plane to Las Vegas now to confirm the situation of Belinda and Henry, the mother and son." "Understood." Winslow and Lassie nodded and turned to leave immediately. Roan pondered for a few seconds, walked back to the interrogation room, and continued to interrogate Hector Jamie. "I guess you already know why we arrested you." Roan put a cup of hot coffee in front of Hector Jamie, then sat back in the chair and asked, Tell me, what is the matter with the villa case? Hector Jamie did not answer Roan's question immediately, but stated his request with a serious face. I request to sign a plea agreement. Chenia frowned slightly when she heard this and turned to look at Roan. Only the head of the special investigation team had the power to decide whether to agree to the other party. Roan stared at Hector Jamie for a long time until Hector Jamie looked unnatural and twisted left and right in his chair. Roan suddenly grinned and agreed to the other party's request. No problem, but you know the requirements of signing a plea agreement, right? After signing the agreement, you must truthfully admit the crime and absolutely cannot make false testimony or false statements. Hector Jamie nodded repeatedly. Seeing this, Roan stopped talking nonsense. 2 hours later, the two parties signed the plea agreement. Hector Jamie's face relaxed, and he confessed everything. When Hector Jamie was young, he met a boss who resold second-hand antiques. From him, he heard about the legendary treasure of Krista's family. After 10 years of investigation, Hector Jamie confirmed that the treasure really existed in this world. The cross that Krista lost was indeed stolen by Hector Jamie, who deliberately disguised himself as a gardener and entered the manor. But Hector Jamie only stole the cross. The ruby ring was always worn by Krista, so he had no chance to get it. After leaving prison, Hector Jamie kept thinking about how to get the ruby ring. At this time, he met Anna in a bar in Las Vegas. Hector Jamie sighed and said Anna was very sad at the time because her beloved boyfriend was forced by the eldest daughter-in-law of Piranha Rodell and died suddenly from an overdose of drugs during exercise. Anna's boyfriend was very handsome and worked in the company of the Odell family. I don't know how he was favored by the eldest daughter-in-law of Piranha Rodell, so the tragedy happened. Anna hated that woman very much, but the other party had a high status and money, so Anna had no way to take revenge. Hector Jamie didn't care after knowing this, because he couldn't help her. Until some time ago, Hector Jamie, who had been observing Krista, learned about the cocktail party. Hector Jamie thought about it and found Anna. Hector Jamie didn't tell Anna about the treasure, but only said that he wanted to steal things to make money, and the cocktail party was an opportunity. Anna could also take advantage of the cocktail party to take revenge on Piranha Odell's eldest daughter-in-law. Not only that, Hector Jamie also said that he found out that Piranha Odell's eldest daughter-in-law secretly deposited a bearer bond worth $50 million in a bank in Las Vegas. As long as he got the fingerprint of Piranha Odell's eldest daughter-in-law, Hector Jamie would have a way to withdraw the bond from the bank, and then they would each get half of the $50 million. Hector Jamie felt that his words were a bit false, but Anna agreed without thinking, and then began to make a plan. The plan they made was not very complicated. Hector Jamie first found the information of Belinda and her son, and then posted an order online to find a capable and technical thief. On the night of the cocktail party, Henry, a middle school student who received $50,000, pretended to be sick and called his mother to trick her into going home. Anna took the opportunity to take over Belinda's position in the kitchen and put drugs in the food, knocking out everyone in the villa. The thief took the opportunity to enter the villa and purchase goods according to the list, stealing things. As for Belinda and Henry, the mother and son, Hector Jamie's original plan was to trick them away and kill them and completely erase the traces. But plans are plans. When it comes to killing people, I still backed off. Hector Jamie swallowed his saliva, saying that he still underestimated the psychological pressure of killing people. According to the original plan, when Hector Jamie took Henry and Belinda, the mother and son, into the pre-prepared basement, Anna at the other end of the villa should have already put the drugs, and the thief should have entered the villa and started the theft. But as soon as Hector Jamie brought people into the basement, his cell phone started ringing wildly. Hector Jamie, who had not planned to do this, found out that it was the thief trio who called him. He was confused because he didn't know what happened. He was also worried that the law enforcement department had caught the thief trio and was using the phone to fish, so Hector Jamie didn't dare to answer. Hector Jamie didn't kill Henry and his son immediately, but took them to a backup location that only he knew, waiting to figure out the situation tomorrow. Then the next day, Hector Jamie saw on TV that all the major news media in Las Vegas reported the news that everyone in the villa had died. Anna has always been responsible for the drug because she needed to do it that night, so I didn't ask in detail. At this point, Hector Jamer's eyes widened and his face was full of shock, but I didn't expect that Anna was a lunatic. She actually drugged and killed everyone in the villa in order to avenge her boyfriend. Hector Jamer, who only wanted to make money, sat on the ground at a loss after learning that everyone in the villa had died. He slapped himself hard a few times before Hector Jamer barely calmed down. Out of fear and because kidnapping and murder are two different things, Hector Jamer did not kill Belinda and Henry, mother and son. But he did not dare to let them go either, so he tied them up together, left their life and death to God, and hurried back to Portland, Oregon. Hector Jamer did not speak fast. It was more than 2 hours after the interrogation ended, and it was already 3:30 in the afternoon. Thank you for your hard work. Roan and Chanel left the interrogation room and walked into the monitoring room next door. Michelle handed them 2 Big Macs and said with a smile, "Winslow just called Mona and me and said that Belinda and Henry, mother and son, have been found in Las Vegas. Apart from malnutrition and poor mental state, they have no other problems." Hector Jamer has explained almost everything here. It seems that the case is almost over. Roan tore the packaging on the burger slowly, looked at Hector Jamer lying on the table in the monitoring screen, and laughed. "Over? I'm afraid Mr. Hector Jamer hasn't let us take the last step yet." Michelle was stunned for a moment when she heard this, and Chanel sneered, looked at the monitoring screen in front of her, and took a big bite of the burger. Chapter 456 The True Truth of the Case. The monitoring room temporarily used by the Special Investigations Team at the FBI branch in Portland. Seeing Chanel and Roan's faces turn cold after taking a big bite of the hamburger, Michelle was a little confused. "Roan, I don't understand what you mean." Roan did not explain immediately, but took out his cell phone and called Lassie. "I'm Lassie." Lassie in Las Vegas was dealing with Henry and his mother with Winslow at this time. When she received Roan's call, she was a little confused. "What's the matter?" Roan didn't waste any words and said directly, "You go to the Christa family's estate immediately and investigate the situation when Hector Jamer was a gardener there." Lassie didn't understand, but she immediately nodded and agreed, and then asked, "Winslow, will you come with me?" "No." Roan shook his head, motioned Lassie to hand the phone to Winslow, and then said, "Winslow, Hector Jamer said that Anna committed this crime in order to avenge her boyfriend. The boyfriend's name is Faye, and he lived in northern Las Vegas before his death. You go and investigate his situation carefully before his death." "Okay." Winslow nodded and agreed immediately without any questions. Roan and Lassie continued to talk for a few words and hung up the phone. Mona, who had been busy writing interrogation records on the computer next to her, saw this and raised her head and frowned and asked, "Roan, what happened?" "It's very simple. Our Mr. Hector Jamer has been lying all the time." Luo An finished the big hamburger in his hand in a few bites and looked at Hector Jamer in the surveillance video, sneering. During the previous interrogation, Luo An had been turning on the emotional perception in his mind, and then he found that when Hector Jamer was narrating the story, Hector said that he was just seeking money and his goal was treasure. This sentence was half true and half false. Anna's boyfriend died of coercion and overdose of drugs by his eldest daughter-in-law, which was also half true and half false. There are bearer bonds of $50 million in the bank, which is true. Hector went online to find the thief, and in order to conceal his true purpose, he wrote down the long list for Pietro and the other two, which is true. Hector kidnapped Henry and his son, but did not dare to kill them because of temporary fear, which is a lie. Hector said that he was deceived by Anna, but he did not expect Anna to replace the drug with poison, which is a lie. In addition to these key points, the ratio of truth to lies in the entire story narrated by Hector Jamer is almost half and half. Not only did Roan, who has emotional perception in his mind, discover this, but Chanel also felt something was wrong. The difference is that Roan noticed where Hector lied, while Chanel simply felt that the other party was lying, but she couldn't figure out the specific situation. Damn it. Upon hearing this, Mona and Michelle cursed Hector in the surveillance video, and then asked, "Roan, what should we do next?" "Of course, we should investigate carefully according to the story Mr. Hector told us. Looking at Hector Jamie, who was dozing on the interrogation table, Roan laughed and said, "Before, Chinia, you found out that Ina would go to a coffee shop in Southwest Las Vegas every Wednesday night after get off work for the past 6 months to buy a cup of coffee to take away, but they couldn't find where she went. Michelle, you and Chinia, go to Las Vegas now and investigate the area around that coffee shop carefully. Make sure to find out where Ina went after buying coffee." "No problem." Chinia and Michelle nodded heavily and turned to leave immediately. Seeing this, Mona raised her hand and asked, "Roan, what about me? From now on, carefully investigate all of Hector's whereabouts and consumption records in the past year." Roan crossed his arms in front of his chest, narrowed his eyes, and said in a deep voice, "I want to see what our Mr. Hector has hidden from us." As soon as Luo An finished speaking, Hector Jamie, who was dozing in the interrogation room, seemed to wake up. He glanced around, raised his head, and smiled faintly at the camera. The next day, Luo An and several temporarily borrowed agents escorted Hector Jamie back to Las Vegas, where the case occurred. Mona stayed in Portland to continue looking for clues. Because of this investigation, computer networks in many places could not help, so for the next week, Winslow, Lassie, Chinia, and Michelle could only visit the scene, knocking on doors and checking door by door, and finally returned to the office temporarily borrowed by the Special Investigation Team. This was the most difficult time to check clues since the establishment of the Special Investigation Team. Fortunately, everyone's hard work was not in vain, and all the agents found useful clues. The detective sat down and said seriously. Winslow spoke first. "Captain, you guessed right. Hector did lie. According to Winslow's investigation, the man named Faye had a sister. From her sister, he learned that Faye did pursue Ina and played sports games with Ina. But the relationship between the two was not good enough to entrust life and death. The sister had met Ina, and her woman's intuition told her that Ina was not a good woman. But before the sister and Ina had a detailed chat, her brother Faye encountered an emergency and left this world." After Winslow finished speaking, Michelle looked at each other and followed closely. "We found out where Ina went after leaving the coffee shop. The two women checked door to door for several days and finally found a landlord in a community south of the coffee shop and learned that Ina rented a house there. After spending $1,000, the two women learned from their neighbors that every Wednesday night, there would be sounds of a man and a woman playing in that house. The woman was Ina, but the neighbors had never seen the man. However, the two women played Hector's voice to the neighbors, and the neighbors said it was very similar to the man's voice." After Michelle finished speaking, Chinia added, "In addition, we found Ina's underwear and a small amount of white powder in that room. According to the test, the white powder was the diquinone trioxide and istazolam that caused the death in the Villa case. Not only that, the room also showed signs of being carefully cleaned, and we couldn't find any hair or fingerprints from anyone other than Ina." After Michelle and Chinia finished speaking, Mona stood up and said, "I didn't find any useful clues about Hector's whereabouts and consumption records. But I found out one thing. When Hector was in prison, his cellmate next door was a guy who understood psychology and was sent to prison because of psychological induction of others to commit crimes. Hector and that cellmate had a good relationship. After Hector was released from prison, he rented a house to live in. Not long after, the consumption records of the neighbors of that house showed that the neighbors bought a lot of psychology books. Luo An took the folders handed over by several people, was silent for a few seconds, and concluded, "So, this guy Hector is most likely in a relationship with Ina, and Hector used his knowledge of psychology to control Ina, causing her to kill those people in the villa and commit suicide. It's very likely." Chinia and Winslow nodded heavily with serious faces. They were experienced and had seen how those religions brainwashed people and how those brainwashed believers were willing to commit suicide. Luo An's expression remained unchanged, while Mona frowned slightly and asked, "But why did Hector do this?" There were 26 people in the villa that night. After the voice fell, Lassie, who had been silent all the time, sneered and stood up, saying, "I found out the reason." Chapter 457 The True Truth of the Case. Lassie stood up, and everyone in the room turned their eyes to her. "According to Roan's instructions, I went to the family estate of the old woman Krista to investigate. Lassie distributed the folders in her hand to everyone and said as she distributed them, "The people in that estate have a very bad attitude. I couldn't find any information at all in the past few days. But later I found an old chef who had worked in the estate for more than 10 years and just left the estate some time ago. I talked to the old chef and learned from him that the old woman Krista has a private life like the eldest daughter-in-law of Piranha Rodell. She is old, but still likes to play." Lassie said that Hector was very handsome when he was young. Not long after he entered the estate disguised as a gardener, he was spotted by Krista. Not only that, the old woman Krista had a good relationship with Piranha Rodell's eldest daughter-in-law, so she recommended Hector to the eldest daughter-in-law. At this point, Lassie's face was full of disgust, and Winslow, Michelle, Mona and Chenia's faces were also full of disgust. Luo An's expression remained unchanged. This kind of thing was nothing to the wealthy people in the Federation. He was now more focused on the case itself. Looking down at the folders in front of him, he was silent for a long time. Roan narrowed his eyes and concluded, "So, Hector wanted to pretend to be a gardener, enter Krista's manor to steal the cross and ring, find the treasure, and make a fortune. But he didn't expect that, because he was handsome, he was spotted by Krista, who was in her 70s, and was recommended by Krista to the eldest daughter-in-law of Pranaodal. Although he successfully stole the cross, he didn't get the ruby ring. In addition, he wanted revenge, so Hector found Anna and brainwashed Anna with emotional and psychological means, making her willing to do things for him, or even commit suicide. After learning about the cocktail party, Hector made a plan to let Anna drug and poison the two old women to avenge himself, and the three thieves went in to steal things so that he would have the opportunity to seize the treasure. Hector could also put the blame on Anna, who committed suicide due to brainwashing, and said that he was just an accomplice, reducing the crime and killing three birds with one stone. Shit. Damn it. Luo An's analysis combined all the clues that everyone had at present. The 5 detectives looked very ugly and cursed after hearing it. After cursing for a while, Mona suddenly thought of something. Her face changed, raised her hand and said, "Everyone, we are facing a difficult problem now." Winslow and Lassie turned their heads in confusion. Chenia and Michelle quickly reacted, looked at each other, and said in unison, "Evidence." "That's right." Mona nodded heavily. Her face became even uglier. "Anna is dead. We don't have absolute evidence to prove that Hector brainwashed Anna and instructed Anna to poison her. Although the detectives have now found out Hector's lies, found Hector's motives, and understood his plan to commit the crime, Hector Jamie can admit that he lied, or he can admit that he and Anna were in a relationship. But it was Anna who poisoned and started the crime on the night of the crime. Hector Jamie can completely insist in court that he didn't know Anna would do that. As for brainwashing Anna, the person involved has committed suicide and died. The special investigation team only has indirect evidence. In court, Hector's lawyer has many reasons to refute. Chino and Michelle thought faster because they knew more about the follow-up work of the case. Winslow and Lassie were not very familiar with this work, but they quickly figured it out. Their faces suddenly became extremely ugly and they cursed. "Fouquet, son of eating." Mona's eyebrows jumped, frowned and thought for a long time, but couldn't think of any good way, so she looked up at Roan and made her own suggestion. "How about we contact the Office of Legal Counsel?" The Office of Legal Counsel is one of the internal agencies of the FBI. When the FBI investigation team encounters difficult legal problems, such as the current situation of the Special Investigation Team, when it is unable to accurately convict the suspect, the Office of Legal Counsel will find a suitable solution, based on federal laws and regulations. But many times the Office of Legal Counsel is not welcome. The petty thieves that the FBI easily catches do not need them to convict when encountering difficulties. The grassroots agents of the FBI have their own unique solutions, such as the great memory recovery technique. When encountering major cases, many suspects have the ability to spend a lot of money to find those well-known lawyers. In order to make money in their own reputation, these well-known lawyers know federal laws much better than those in the Office of Legal Counsel. Therefore, the position of the Office of Legal Counsel has always been awkward. They are not needed for small cases, and they often cannot solve big cases. Roan held a folder in his hand and sat on a chair with his eyes closed. He thought of the difficulties encountered in evidence before Mona and had been thinking about countermeasures. Hearing Mona's suggestion, Roan opened his eyes and nodded. "Michelle, call the Office of Legal Counsel." "Okay." Michelle got up and left to make a phone call. Just as Chinia was about to continue talking, Roan suddenly grabbed Mona's arm and pulled Mona, who was holding a laptop, into another room. X3 Winslow, Chinia, and Lassie looked at each other when they saw this scene. The three people who knew the relationship between Roan and Mona didn't know what Roan was going to do. After a while, Roan walked out of the room alone, waved his hand and said, "Winslow, Lassie, go to the holding room and bring Hector Jamie to the interrogation room. Chanel, you will interrogate this guy with me later." "No problem." Winslow and Chanel stood up and nodded, and Lassie muttered in a low voice, "Only 40 seconds, so fast." Bang, Roan's head was full of black lines, and he picked up a folder and hit Lassie's head hard. Wednesday, 12 o'clock noon, an interrogation room of the FBI Las Vegas branch. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hector Jamie." Chanel sat down opposite the interrogation table, and Roan sat on the interrogation table, looking down at Hector Jamie, and laughed. "You really opened my eyes." This sentence is Roan's heartfelt words. Since he came to this world and saw so many cases, Hector Jamie is still a guy who really gave Roan a difficult feeling. It's not that the case is difficult to solve, but that we have caught the person and found out the truth. But we can't guarantee that the other party will be convicted 100% according to the charges. This is the uncomfortable part. Hector Jamie smiled when he heard Roan's words. "Sorry, Captain Greenwood, I don't understand." Before he finished speaking, Roan threw the large frame of clues he had found in front of him. Hector Jamie looked down at it for a few times, and the smile on his face did not disappear, but became brighter. "Sorry, Captain Greenwood, I still don't understand what you mean." Roan stood up from the interrogation table, took back the folder, and said expressionlessly, "I won't say any more nonsense, because you lied to us before, and now the plea agreement is invalid. Do you have any questions?" "No problem." Hector Jamie shook his head and added, "I admit that I lied to you before, and I admit that I had a relationship with Anna. But I really didn't instruct Anna to kill people. My goal was just money. The poison was Anna's own decision, and I really don't know anything." Snap. Roan threw the folder to Chinia, leaned on the interrogation table with both hands, and looked at Hector Jamie expressionlessly. Hector Jamie looked up and smiled at Roan. Dung. 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 The atmosphere in the interrogation room became more and more oppressive. At this moment, there was a knock on the door outside. Chapter 458 The True Truth of the Case. FBI, Las Vegas branch, an interrogation room. There was a knock on the door, and Roan turned his eyes away from Hector Jamie and walked out of the interrogation room. Michelle and two unfamiliar men and women in suits were standing in the corridor. "Hello, Team Leader Greenwood." The white woman in a suit with a ponytail standing in the front stretched out her hand to Roan and introduced herself with a smile. "My name is Fiona, from the Office of Legal Counsel." "Hello." He stretched out his hand and shook hands with the other party with a smile. Roan and Michelle took Fiona and her colleagues to the office area. After a few simple greetings, Roan gave to the legal situation of the case. After carefully examining it for a while, Fiona narrowed her eyes and began to communicate in a low voice with her male colleague for a moment, then stood up and walked to Roan and said with a smile, "Captain Greenwood, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course." Roan took Fiona into the conference room next to him, closed the door, poured 2 cups of coffee for himself and Fiona, and asked, "What do you think of this case? To be honest, if it goes to court now, it will be very disadvantageous for the special investigation team." Fiona took the coffee and thanked him, then frowned and said, "Your special investigation team does not have any direct evidence to prove that Hector Jamie is the mastermind behind this case." Roan took a sip of coffee, his expression unchanged, and said in a light voice, "That's why I asked my men to find you. If the special investigation team had direct evidence in their hands now, there would be no need to find these people in the legal counsel's office for this case." What Team Leader Greenwood said makes sense. Fiona was stunned for a moment, then chuckled. She thought about it and said that she and her colleagues had come up with 3 methods. The first method was to do nothing and go to court to try to convince the judge that Hector Jamie was the mastermind according to the evidence at hand of the special investigation team. This plan had the lowest success rate. The second method was to break Hector Jamie's current accomplice status and use the evidence at hand to convince the judge in court to let the judge determine that Hector Jamie was the accomplice of this case. Federal law has a strong principle of following precedents. In addition, Hector Jamie had been in prison before. Finer was confident that bad people only do bad things, and that Hector Jamie would definitely go with the flow and use Ina's love for her, and the reason that he watched her poison her to convince the judge and jury. Luo An's expression did not change, and he did not speak. This plan meant that Finer gave up revealing that Hector Jamie was the mastermind behind this case. After a few seconds of silence, Roan asked, "What is the third method?" Ina laughed, put down the coffee cup, and said, "Respect federal law, respect Hector Jamie's plan, but also respect the rights of the relatives of the 26 victims." Roan narrowed his eyes when he heard Finer's words. He understood what Finer meant. According to federal law, the special investigation team cannot tell the relatives all the details of the case, but the relatives of the 26 victims have the right to know who killed their relatives. There are many rich people among those relatives, and these rich people always have ways to find out the truth of this case from other places. How the rich people will treat Hector Jamie, who is imprisoned after knowing the truth, is not something the special investigation team can control. It can only be said that in the capitalist country of the Federation, money can really do whatever it wants. Thinking about this clearly, Roan looked at Finer in front of him and frowned slightly. Looking at the silent Roan, Finer's eyes flashed with a gleam, coughed lightly, and said, "Team Leader Greenwood, I think." Roan interrupted her as soon as Finer started to speak, then opened the door of the conference room and said with a smile, "Thank you for your help, Miss Finer. I will consider your suggestion." "Okay." Finer was slightly stunned and left the conference room with a smile. Roan exchanged a few simple pleasantries with the two and then motioned to Michelle to send them away. As soon as Michelle and the other two walked out of the area, Roan walked to Lassie not far away and said in a low voice with a blank expression, "Lassie, go check this Finer and her colleagues." Lassie was full of doubts when she heard this and looked up to see Roan's expressionless face. Her face changed instantly and she nodded heavily to agree. "No problem, I'll go right away." Looking at the back of Lassie leaving quickly, Roan folded his hands in front of his chest and his eyes narrowed slightly. Roan didn't think he was a good person, and he had killed many people since he came to this world. But Finer's third suggestion was on another level, and if it went wrong, it would lead to a deep pit that one could never climb out of. This made Luo An start to think, was Finer just making suggestions, or did she have other ideas, or was there someone behind her? "Hey, Luo An." Just as Luo An was thinking, Mona suddenly ran out of the room with the laptop in her arms, looking excited. "You are amazing. How did you know?" "Stop." Luo An quickly reached out and covered Mona's mouth. Looking down at the laptop screen for a few times, Luo An grinned, turned around and returned to the interrogation room with the laptop in his arms. Entering the interrogation room again, Roan didn't waste any words and asked directly, "Hector Jamie, you admit that you had sex with Ina, right?" Hector Jamie looked at Roan for a moment and nodded, "Yes." Roan asked immediately, "Did you have sex in the room that Ina rented?" "Don't lie, dear Mr. Hector." Hector had just started to speak when Roan interrupted him, staring at him and said, "You have lied before. If you lie again this time, the judge and jury in the court will probably have a worse impression of you." Hector was silent for a long time after hearing this and nodded slowly. "Yes, we did have sex in the room that Ina rented." "Very good." Roan smiled with satisfaction, then put the laptop in front of Hector Jamie and said, "My agents just found out that the diquinone trioxide and istazolum in that room were ordered on a criminal website. This criminal website is the same website you used to contact the Petro trio, and when the buyer placed an order, the signal address showed that the order was in the room rented by Ina. What do you think about this?" "I'm sorry, Captain Greenwood. I've said before that Ina has always been in charge of purchasing drugs, and I didn't ask." Hector Jamie's expression remained unchanged, with a smile on his face, and he explained lightly, as for the website, where Anna bought drugs, it is the same website where I contacted the Petro trio, because when I contacted the Petro trio, I didn't avoid Anna. Anna saw this website, registered an account for herself, and secretly ordered drugs behind my back. Isn't it normal? It's normal. Luo An smiled slightly. The room has been carefully cleaned, and we can't find Anna's computer. Maybe it was smashed, sunk, or burned by you, so there is no way to prove the truth of what you said. Wow, Captain Greenwood. Hector Jamie smiled even more, but shook his head again and again. You are talking nonsense without any evidence. I can sue you for defamation in court. You can sue me at will. Luo An leaned forward slowly, looked down at Hector and said, I just want to tell you one thing. That criminal website has actually been under the surveillance of the NSA. As soon as the words fell, the smile on Hector's face suddenly became extremely stiff, while the smile on Luo An's face became more gentle and kind. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 459. Key Clues. Successful Trap. Case concluded. Arsenic trioxide, an impurity-free extract commonly known as arsenic in the East, is odorless and tasteless, and is a white frosty powder. Istazolum, a benzodiazepine sedative, a psychotropic drug. Neither of these two items can be bought casually. Only the underground world can get a large quantity that can kill 26 people. Before, when Mona and others were thinking about how to prove that Hector Jamie brainwashed Anna, making Anna willing to poison and commit suicide afterwards, Luo An had been thinking about where Hector Jamie got these murderous things. Thinking of the criminal website full of monsters and demons, and thinking that Hector contacted Petro and the other two on that website, Luo An made a bold guess that Hector was likely to buy the drugs on that website. After catching the employer Hector, Mona had already obtained his account, and there was no record of Hector buying drugs in that account. However, Hector Jamie had always told Roan that it was Anna who bought the drugs, and it had nothing to do with him. Roan naturally focused on Anna's computer, and suspected that Hector had used Anna's computer to log into the website and buy the drugs. Hector Jamie had obviously thought of this before making the plan for this case, so he cleaned the room that Anna rented, and Chinia and others couldn't find Anna's computer at all. But you don't know that this criminal website has been monitored by the NSA, National Security Agency. Luo An did not directly say that the founder of the website was the NSA. He just looked at Hector Jamie and said with a bright smile, I don't know whether the NSA caught a big fish, but as the head of the FBI's special investigation team, I did catch a small loach like you. The smile on Hector Jamie's face had long disappeared. He stared at Luo An for a few seconds, snorted coldly, and said, sorry, I still don't understand what you mean, Team Leader Greenwood. Even if that website has been monitored by the NSA, so what? It was Anna who bought the medicine, not me. Wow. Luo An left the interrogation table, walked to Chinia who had been recording things, patted Chinia on the shoulder, and said with a smile, look at our Mr. Hector. He has told so many lies that he believes them himself. Hector Jamie's face was very ugly, and he said word by word, I didn't lie. A lie repeated 1,000 times is still a lie. It may deceive some people for a while, but when the truth comes out, the lie will always fail. It just depends on whether people are willing to accept it. Luo An said a few words casually, then took the laptop on the interrogation table in front of him, and said while slowly typing on the keyboard, my agents contacted the NSA according to my request, and asked the NSA for the account number for purchasing quinone trioxide and istazolum. The computer can be destroyed, but the records in the account will always exist. The place where the account placed the order was in the room rented by Anna. This has been mentioned before, so I won't go into details. When Luo An narrated these, Hector Jamie listened closely with wide eyes. Suddenly, Luo An changed the subject, looked up at Hector, and asked with a smile, by the way, dear Mr. Hector, the information shows that you have been to college. Did Ms. Ina go to college? I remember that the information shows that she came to Las Vegas before she finished high school. Hearing Roan's question, Hector Jamie was stunned for a few seconds and suddenly remembered something. His face suddenly became very ferocious and he cursed angrily. "Fouquet. Roan Greenwood. You are just a bastard. @%." The curse was fierce and loud, and the detectives outside the interrogation room changed their faces and ran to the door of the interrogation room to check the situation in case of any accidents. Roan in the interrogation room was not angry at being scolded, but the smile on his face became more sunny. He liked Hector Jamie's hysterical look when the plan failed. Chinia, who had been recording things next to him, looked down at the words she wrote and suddenly realized the data shows that Ina has never been to college. The way and tone of her writing English letters are completely different from Hector Jamie. That's right. Roan smiled and snapped his fingers and showed Chinia the records of the chat between the buyer and the seller when Mona found the two drugs, quinone trioxide and istazolam, in the laptop. English is different from the Eastern writing system. The Eastern writing system is ideographic, while English is phonetic. Even if ordinary people cannot understand some professional words, they can roughly guess what the word means through the original meaning and combination of several Eastern words. But English is different. Every time the 26 English letters are combined into a word, it has a new meaning. The connection between words is different. You must write them all down to understand what the sentence means. This leads to some Westerners having reading difficulties, even when they enter society as adults, and they cannot understand what each sentence means. If an Easterner cannot understand the text when entering society, such a person is generally considered to have intellectual problems. In the Western world, people who have received higher education and those who have not received higher education have very different ways of speaking, writing in English, grammar and vocabulary. This is also one of the reasons why the United Kingdom used to look down on the old hats of the Federation. Many professional words in the Federation do not know what they mean, let alone what they represent. In the laptop, when the buyer placed an order for the two drugs, quinone trioxide and istazolam, the words, word structure and tone used by the seller were completely different from those of Ina, a woman who dropped out of high school. Only Hector Jamie, who had received higher education, could say them. Luo An had induced Hector Jamie several times before and made him admit that he had had sex with Ina and that it was in the room that Ina rented, so Hector Jamie had lost all his excuses at this time. If Hector Jamie had not stepped into the trap that Luo An had dug for him just now and insisted that he had never been to that room, Hector Jamie would still have a chance to quibble. But now, the NSA clues appeared, and Hector Jamie, under Luo An's guidance, stepped into the trap that Luo An had dug for him step by step. The plan was completely failed and exposed, so he lost control of his emotions and cursed wildly. Pa pa pa. After Luo An finished explaining, Hector Jamie's eyes were red and his cursing became more intense. Chanel, who was standing next to him, and Mona, Winslow, and Michelle in the corridor all looked at Roan with excitement and admiration, and applauded him. "Winslow, Michelle, take him away." Roan opened the door of the interrogation room, and waved his hand to signal the two to take Hector Jamie to the detention room. The interrogation process was recorded by surveillance video, and everything Hector Jamie said was recorded. With the evidence found by Roan and Mona, Hector Jamie had no chance to turn back, no matter how much he cursed. Winslow and Michelle took Hector Jamie away. Mona took back her laptop and patted Roan's arm with a smile. "Well done. Thank you for your hard work." Roan laughed, stretched his waist, raised his hand to check the time, and waved his hand. "Everyone, the case is solved. Let's have a big dinner tonight." "Yeah." Chanel smiled, and Mona just shouted happily when Lassie suddenly walked into the room from outside, grabbed Roan's arm, and said seriously, "Roan, you are right. There is something wrong with Fina." Chapter 460, Dinner, Fina's Identity, and the Logic Behind It. At 8:30 p.m., Las Vegas, Joel Robertson Restaurant. This is a Michelin 3-star French restaurant, mainly serving traditional French cuisine, and the 16-course dinner set is particularly famous. Those who order it can even enjoy the extended Lincoln pickup sent by the restaurant. In a room deep in the restaurant, there is a long Western-style table. Winslow, Chanel, Lassie, Michelle and Mona sit on both sides of the long table, chatting quietly while enjoying the novel and beautiful French food on the table. There are several candles on the table beside the 5 people. At the other end of the long table, Roan, who is dressed in a suit, and Lexa Rodell, who is dressed in a red dress, sit facing each other. In front of them are delicious food with good color, fragrance, and taste, but neither of them has the intention to eat. Today, the makeup on Lexa Rodell's face is not as sharp as when they first met a few days ago, and has become much gentler. Picking up the wine glass, Lexa shook it towards Luo An and said with a smile, "Thank you very much for leading the special investigation team to solve the case of our Odell family, Captain Greenwood." Luo An chuckled and did not answer this question. Instead, he picked up the wine glass and clinked it with the other party and said with a smile, "There are 6 people in the special investigation team, and the restaurant has served 6 set meals. Miss Lexa is sorry for spending money tonight." "Thank you. It's my duty." The 2 clinked their wine glasses. Lexa laughed, tilted her head back, and took a sip, then put down the wine glass, leaned back and crossed her legs, looked at Luo An with a smile, and asked, "As a family member of the victim, I would like to know the details of this case. Can Captain Greenwood tell me some of it?" Luo An raised his eyebrows when he heard this, and asked back, "Doesn't Miss Lexa already know it?" Luo An had asked Lassie to investigate Fiona in the legal counsel's office before. As a result, Lassie found out that Fiona had close ties with the head of a certain group in the FBI Las Vegas branch. Not only that, Fiona called the team leader not long after leaving the special investigation team. When Luo An learned the news, he immediately figured out the logic behind the incident. The Odell family villa case is an absolute big case. As long as the murderer is found in court, it will be a great achievement. But because Lakosha Odell felt that the murderer in this case was targeting the Odell family, and there was a group of entangled enemies outside the Odell family, she did not trust the local law enforcement departments in Las Vegas. So she found Luo An from outside the area and handed the case over to the special investigation team. From another perspective, this kind of thing is a slap in the face of the local law enforcement departments in Las Vegas. But Lakosha Odell quickly gained a foothold with her sharp means, and Luo An Greenwood also had a few thighs behind him. Even if the local law enforcement departments in Las Vegas were 100 unhappy, they could only temporarily suppress their emotions and choose to wait and see, and they might even secretly curse Luo An and his team for failing to solve the case. But Luo An broke their fantasy, successfully led the special investigation team to solve the case, and caught the murderer. The local law enforcement department in Las Vegas was even more upset and frustrated when they learned about this, but they had no way to deal with it until Roan was stuck for a whole week because he had not found the key evidence. This was an opportunity, so they sent Fiona. If Roan followed Fiona's third suggestion and accidentally leaked the details of Hector Jamie's crime to the wealthy relatives of the victims, once Hector Jamie died in prison because of this, Roan would have a handle. This handle could be big or small, and if it was used by someone at a critical moment, it would definitely blow Roan up. Even thinking deeper, were the people who attacked Hector Jamie the wealthy relatives of the victims? Would someone use this handle to persuade Roan to do something? Or did someone just want to take this opportunity to win Roan over to their own hands and make Roan turn against them at a critical moment? Before coming to this restaurant at the invitation of Lexa tonight, Roan called Verinus and Potent Burn and briefly talked about this matter. Soldiers versus soldiers, generals versus generals. This kind of thing naturally has to be handed over to the higher ups to handle. On the one hand, it is to ask for help, and on the other hand, it is to prove one's ability to the higher ups and reflect one's own value. At the same time, both Verinus and Potent Burn are not easy to deal with, and they will definitely get some benefits from certain people in the local law enforcement departments in Las Vegas. As the targeted person, Verinus and Potent Burn will definitely share some of the benefits with Roan after the matter is resolved. Killing many birds with one stone, Roan likes to do this kind of thing the most. As for what Roan said just now, Lexa Rodell already knew about the case. It was not a lie or a test of the other party. After all, the Odell family has been operating in the city of Las Vegas for generations, and the Federation is still a capitalist country. If Lexa, the current sole controller of the Odell family, cannot get the news of this case, it would be a lie. I do know some general information. Lexa nodded with a chuckle, then crossed her hands and rested her chin, blinking her big eyes at Roan, and chuckled softly. But Captain Greenwood is an eyewitness to this case after all. I believe you must know something that I can't find out. Since you can't find it, don't ask. Many times, it's not good to know too much about things. No matter how high a person's status is, this sentence is useful. Roan ignored Lexa's admiring and tempting look and chuckled softly. Mr. Pranay Odell passed away not long ago, and the Odell family should have a lot of things to deal with. I think those things are more important than getting information from me, aren't they? Hector James' life, after entering prison, will definitely not be very good. Those rich people will definitely find out the situation behind this case. This is determined by the federal system. As the head of the special investigation team, Roan didn't intend to tell Lexa too many details of the case. Lexa blinked and stared at Luo An for a long time, until Mona, who was not far away, narrowed her eyes slightly. Then she chuckled and retracted her gaze. Okay, team leader Greenwood is indeed a good person. I can't say he is a good person. I just do what I want, and don't do what I don't want. Luo An smiled, and waved his hand. Just as he was about to continue speaking, Lexa suddenly stood up, and motioned the secretary who had been standing next to him to put on the thick woolen coat for her. Then she walked to Luo An and bent down, leaning close to Luo An's ear and whispered, I have asked someone to deposit the agreed fund into the account. In addition, to be honest, if you were not too young, I might have fallen in love with you. After speaking, Lexa stood up, looked around the room, especially at Mona, then laughed and left the room with the female secretary. The side of her face was faintly surrounded by the smell of perfume left by Lexa, but Luo An didn't care about the smell, but thought about what Lexa just said with a strange look. What do you mean he is too young? He is 26 years old, and Lexa Odell is only 19 years old. But thinking back to how Lexa had tortured her 80-year-old father, and the bald middle-aged killer before, Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly, as if he understood something. On the other side, seeing the scene just now, Lassie swallowed the food in her mouth, tentatively moved closer to Mona, and whispered, Mona, are you okay? What? Mona was stunned for a moment, and when she saw the look in Lassie's eyes, she understood what she meant. She immediately laughed, and shook her head and said, don't worry, I'm fine. Luo An can't possibly fall for that woman Lexa. Lassie's face was full of confusion. Why? Mona proudly puffed out her chest, and said in a low voice, because she is too young. Lassie. Chapter 461, taking stock of the harvest, and heading to the bar. When you ask someone what the characteristics of French food are, they may say that the cooking skills are superb and the ingredients are rich, or they may say that they pay attention to details and emphasize the dining ceremony. But for Own, French food has only one characteristic: slow. The more expensive the French food, the slower it is. The Joel Robertson restaurant is undoubtedly an excellent restaurant. Every dish Roan tastes has a rich flavor unique to the ingredients, which is very unique and charming. The meal that Kilekisha ordered for the special investigation team was a 16-course dinner set, and each person had one. They ate for nearly 3 hours, from 8:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. Since drinking the physical potion, Roan's appetite has become bigger and bigger, and his digestion speed has become faster and faster. After tasting all 16 dishes, Roan was not only not full, but even hungrier. The other people in the special investigation team, Michelle and Mona, had a smaller appetite, and they didn't even finish the 16 dishes. Lassie and Chinia finished eating everything, and felt a little full. Winslow, who was tall and strong, didn't feel hungry like Roan, but he also felt lonely after eating. At 11:30 p.m., the dishes were finished. Several people looked at each other, and finally turned their eyes to Roan. Lassie scratched her head and asked tentatively, Roan, what are we going to do next? What? Roan laughed, took an empty plate, put his mobile phone in the middle of the plate, and pushed it to everyone, grinning, of course. Calculate the gains after the case is over. Before coming to Las Vegas, Lexa Odell showed her sincerity and said that she was willing to pay an additional $2 million in overtime pay to each member of the special investigation team, and the overtime pay of Roan The team leader was $3 million. Lexa kept her word, and the money just went to the account Roan gave earlier, and Roan also forwarded it directly to everyone. Not only that, Lexa also funded the special investigation team with $10 million of special case handling funds. Chanel, Winslow, Michelle, Lassie and Mona each received $1 million, Roan received $3 million, and the remaining $2 million was reserved for handling other cases in the future. After the case was over, Roan, the head of the special investigation team, received a total of $6 million, and the 5 team members received $3 million each. Everyone made a fortune. Roan, I love you so much. Seeing the text message sent to her by the bank on her mobile phone, Lassie screamed with excitement, and while shouting, she hugged Mona's arm. Roan was stunned, and Lassie smiled. I won't hug you. If I hug you, Mona will be angry. I'm also angry if you hug Mona. Roan pretended to be angry, stood up and flew to grab Lassie. Lassie smiled and pretended to push Mona out, but unexpectedly, Mona turned her eyes and raised the corners of her mouth slightly and grabbed Lassie in return. Lassie and Mona, who had reacted, started to play together with a smile. Chanel, who was also very excited, walked to Roan and expressed her gratitude with a face full of gratitude. Roan waved his hand and was about to speak. Winslow was also excited and flushed. He walked in front of Roan and saluted Roan solemnly as the hostage rescue team would do. Chanel, who saw this scene, reacted and stood still and saluted Roan as the international business department would do. Michelle didn't know what to say, but just smiled at Roan, silently made up her mind to handle the follow-up work of the case in the future, and then ran to the side to help Mona. Lassie, in Roan's emotional perception in his mind, Chanel, Winslow, and Michelle's good impression of him rose to the same golden light and warmth as Lassie. Don't be so polite. Roan pulled down Chanel's arm, then put his arm around Winslow's shoulders, smiling and saying, you should think about what gift to buy for your son in a few days. Ha ha ha. Winslow, with a flushed face, laughed loudly. Chanel also moved her eyes slightly and said, Roan, I want to take a leave in a few days and go back to see my parents. Among the members of the special investigation team, Winslow has been married and divorced, with a young son and an ex-wife. Lassie likes young and beautiful girls, and has affairs every night. Michelle has no worldly desires, and only likes to read. As for Chanel, after such a long time of understanding, Roan and others learned that Chanel had a boyfriend in the past, but during a mission, her boyfriend was captured and tortured to death by the enemy. Although Chanel took revenge afterwards and killed the enemy with her own hands, she was left with a deep psychological shadow and completely lost the desire to find a new boyfriend. She is currently a non-marriageist and just wants to take good care of her parents and let them enjoy their old age. Roan agreed to Chinia without hesitation and turned to look at Mona. Lassie was arguing with Mona and Michelle. Hey, ladies, stop it. Roan picked up a small tomato from the table and gently smashed it on Lassie's head, attracting the attention of the 3 people. Roan waved his hand and said loudly, I will be the boss tomorrow. Everyone will have a day off. There is a bar not far away. Let's go together. We won't go home until we are drunk tonight. Oh, hearing the word bar, Lassie's eyes lit up and cheered. Several people didn't hesitate, took their own items, and immediately left the restaurant and went to the bar. The music was violent, the lights were flashing, and there were men and women drinking and chatting. This is a very famous bar in Las Vegas, open 24 hours a day, serving customers who won or lost money in the casino upstairs. Everyone in the special investigation team was very happy tonight. As expected by everyone, Lassie ran directly to a corner and studied the career line with 2 young and beautiful girls, and even pulled in a 3rd girl later. Chanel chatted with a female boxer who was visiting Las Vegas. After a few drinks, they walked to a nearby gym with flushed faces and started to compete. Luo An initially thought that Winslow was older and more stable. Unexpectedly, after a few drinks, Winslow walked to a booth not far away and had a brief chat with a voluptuous white woman who looked to be in her 30s or 40s. Then they left the bar together, faster than Lassie. Luo An, I never thought there would be a master. Turning his head to look at Michelle, she was the only normal one. After drinking with Mona for half a day, she was drunk by Mona and fell asleep quietly on the sofa in the booth. Mona, who was left, had already drunk quite a bit of wine. When Michelle lay down, she smiled and came to Luo An, handed him the wine glass, and asked, "It's your turn." Luo An was still conscious at this time. He took the wine glass and saw Mona's face flushed. He suddenly had a bad idea. He hugged Mona and whispered in her ear, "It's okay to drink, how about we play a game?" Under the influence of alcohol, Mona's brain was a little slow, and she asked in confusion, "What game?" "Let's each say a bet, whoever loses will." Mona's eyes moved slightly, and she nodded heavily. "Okay." Luo An raised his mouth slightly when he heard this, and reached out to pick up the wine glass on the table. The plan was beautiful, but reality is always unexpected. Mona didn't drink much at all. Just like Michelle, she fell asleep on the sofa in the booth. Luo An was helpless. He carried the two of them upstairs to the hotel to book 2 rooms. Michelle had a separate room and asked a waitress to help her deal with her clothes, then walked into another room and threw Mona on the bed. Mona mumbled a few words and turned over to continue sleeping. Roan turned and walked into the bathroom. At this moment, his cell phone suddenly rang. He pressed the answer button. "It's me, Roan. It's me, Javari." The voice of Mona's father, Javari Evans, rang on the phone. He asked, "Are you free now?" Looking at the toilet that had just been opened, Roan hesitated for a second and nodded. "I'm going to the toilet now." Chapter 462. House purchased by Jolie. Real estate investment. Las Vegas. A hotel suite. On the other end of the phone, Mona's father, Javari Evans, was stunned for a moment, then quickly reacted and said speechlessly, "What a cold joke." "It's not a joke, it's just a fact." After the solution, Roan washed his hands and asked, "What's the matter with you calling so late?" "Mona just drank some wine and is sleeping now. She won't wake up for a while." "It has nothing to do with Mona. I'm mainly calling you." On the other end of the phone, Javari stood on a cruise ship, looking at the high-rise buildings with dim lights in the distance, took a sip of red wine, and said in a very unhappy tone, "I bought a house for Mona in Los Angeles. You can move there when you go back." Javari checked the current address of Mona and Roan a few days ago, wanting to mail some European specialties to them, but found that the two had been renting a house in Los Angeles. Knowing that Roan had made a lot of money, Javari felt very unhappy. Later, when he learned that Roan and Mona were splitting the rent of the rental house in half, Javari wanted to return to the Federation and kill Roan with an axe. But thinking that Mona's heart was on Roan, Javari had to give up the idea with a curse. In order to prevent Mona from suffering in the rental house, Javari asked his acquaintances for help and bought a villa in an area not far from the FBI branch in Los Angeles, which was registered under Mona's name. Considering that both the euro and the US dollar are continuing to depreciate, investment is the kingly way. Javari also bought several villas in several well-known communities in Los Angeles, waiting for the villas to appreciate in the future, and then selling them to make a fortune. After listening to Javari's narration, Roan looked up and covered his eyes with a speechless face. The reason for renting a house is that Roan and Mona both know that they will not stay in Los Angeles for a long time, so there is no need to buy a house. The two of them split the rent equally, more because Mona wanted to prove her independence, and Luo An respected Mona and didn't want to have a conflict with her in this regard. In fact, neither of them took it to heart. Javari spent money to buy a house and let Luo An and Mona live in it. Luo An didn't feel that he was living off a gigolo because he was richer. The reason why Luo An felt speechless was because Luo An remembered that in his previous life, starting in 2007, there was a subprime mortgage crisis in the federal government, and the real estate in the whole country collapsed. During that time, law enforcement agencies in various places went to the bottom of some buildings to shovel corpses. Now the timeline has officially entered 2006. Javari bought a villa in large amounts at this time. Luo An has already started to calculate how much money Javari will lose this time. As for the impossibility of direct bankruptcy, Javari is an old fox, and it has become a subconscious habit for him to have 3 burrows. He will not put all his money in real estate. In addition, there is Mrs. Hanover behind Javari, who is richer. Luo An also tried to persuade Javari indirectly, but Javari rejected him without any care. Luo An had no choice but to sigh and change the subject and asked, "By the way, how is your retirement application now? It has been approved." Speaking of this, Javari laughed and was very happy. Although he was almost killed by the insider, he finally got through this game with the help of Luo An and others. After working in the CIA for so many years, Javari was used to life and death, and had seen many people who died halfway. Not only did he make it to the end, but he could also get a pension and retire safely. He was already quite satisfied. On the other end of the phone, Javari picked up the wine glass, raised his head, and drank it all. Feeling the sea breeze, he smiled and said, "Mrs. Hanover and I have made a plan to travel around the world. Mona and Caroline will be left to Luo An for the time being." Luo An's eyelids twitched. He could understand that Mona was left to him to take care of, but what did he mean by Caroline? Suddenly, Roan thought of something and added, "When you and Mrs. Hanover travel around the world, remember to bring more bodyguards. You have worked in the CIA for so many years, and you must have many enemies. I don't want to receive a call from Caroline one day saying that you are missing again." Crow's mouth. Javari on the other end of the phone rolled his eyes and then threatened Roan with the old saying that if Mona was bullied, he would come back and shoot Roan to death, and then hung up the phone. In the hotel, Roan threw his phone aside, stretched hard, and then walked into the bedroom, simply dealt with Mona's clothes, and then hugged Mona, and walked into the bathroom. After drinking so much alcohol, Roan didn't want to be vomited on by Mona in the middle of the night. The next day, all members of the special investigation team took a day off. Before 8 o'clock in the morning, Mona woke up and opened her eyes. She wanted to wash up and call for breakfast, but as soon as she stood up from the bed, Roan reached out and grabbed her arm. Mona, with disheveled hair and a lazy look, turned back in confusion. "What are you doing?" After a night of hangover, although Mona was sober, she was still a little confused, and her mind was working much slower than before. "What are you doing?" Last night, because Mona was drunk and failed to achieve the goal beforehand, Luo An, who was full of anger in the morning, dragged Mona back to bed, covered her with the quilt and grinned. "What do you think I'm going to do?" Looking at Luo An, who was so close, Mona's eyes widened instantly. "Wait a minute, Before Mona finished speaking, the hands of the clock on the wall not far away slowly walked to 12 o'clock noon. "Damn it." Mona grabbed the pillow and threw it hard at Luo An, who came out of the bathroom and said viciously, "Call and order food. I'm starving." "Okay." Luo An laughed and handed the bath towel to Mona, successfully getting a roll of the eyes from Mona as a reward. Mona got up and went into the shower room to wash up. Roan walked into the living room and called the hotel waiter to order food. Then he called each of the special investigation team members one by one and asked about the situation briefly to avoid any accidents. Michelle had left the hotel and was currently picking books in a small bookstore on a street corner in Las Vegas that was about to go bankrupt. When she received Roan's call, she thanked Roan for helping her open a room last night. Winslow was with the woman from last night. When he answered the phone, the two were eating at a restaurant. Chanel and the female boxer were in a clinic. Last night, the two had a fight during the competition because of alcohol. They were currently applying medicine in the clinic. As for Lassie, it was not her who answered the phone, but a woman with a soft voice. Hearing that Lassie was flirting with 4 or 5 women on the phone, and occasionally there were some more exciting sounds, Roan hung up the phone with a blank expression. There was no envy or jealousy, but he felt that Lassie's long-term life was very bad for her health. So Roan decided to increase Lassie's work tomorrow by 3 times, so that she could focus more on work and take good care of her body. The hotel waiter brought the food to the suite not long after. After Mona washed up, she sat down with Roan and tasted the special steak recommended by the waiter. After eating a piece of steak, Roan wiped his mouth and told Mona that Javari had bought a villa in Los Angeles. Mona was stunned for a moment, silent for a few seconds, and continued to eat with her head down. After a while, Mona suddenly looked up at Roan and did not mention a villa, but asked another question. "Roan, this is Las Vegas. Did you remind Lassie and the others not to go to the casino?" Chapter 463 Return to Los Angeles. Follow-up work assignment for the case. I've reminded them. Don't worry, they know their limits. Luo An put down the food in his mouth and nodded with a smile. Except for Mona, the other 4 members of the special investigation team actually have no interest in gambling. There is no need to say much about Michelle. Lassie is like a hamster. She only thinks about saving money for retirement. She didn't pay for the hotel room last night. There is no way this guy can go to the casino to play cards. Although Chanel is not as ridiculously thrifty as Lassie, she is also busy saving money to take care of her parents and will not go to the casino. Winslow is the most mature, and he also has a son who is obsessed with his ex-wife. He will not spend money indiscriminately in the casino. Okay. After finishing the food on the table, Mona leaned back and patted her stomach lightly. She let out a long sigh and asked with a smile, "Now that we are full, what shall we do next?" Luo An turned his head to look at the bedroom. Mona immediately crossed her hands in front of her chest to make an X, widened her eyes and said loudly, "No. I haven't rested enough. No. What are you thinking about?" Luo An rolled his eyes and raised his hand to point to the clothes rack in the bedroom. He had just called the waiter to deliver several new women's clothing and said, "You got drunk and vomited yesterday and your clothes can't be worn anymore. These are new clothes. Change into one and we'll go out shopping. If nothing unexpected happens, we will leave Las Vegas this time, and I'm afraid we won't come back for a long time. I love you so much, Luo An." Mona's eyes lit up. When she heard this, she got up from the chair and kissed Luo An hard on the face, then ran into the bedroom with a smile, closed the door, and started to change clothes. Why close the door? It's not like I haven't seen it before. Seeing the bedroom door closed, Roan muttered in a low voice, turned his head to look at the scenery outside the window, and began to guess what the villa that Jolie bought looked like. This kind of father-in-law took the initiative to buy a house for himself and Mona to live in. Roan really encountered it for the first time. It felt quite strange. Caesar's Palace Shopping Center, Fashion Show Shopping Center, Outlet Mall, Grand Canal Shops. These are the oldest and largest shopping malls in Las Vegas. There are all kinds of brands and a wide range of goods. Merchants say that almost all the goods in the world can be found here. Starting from 1:30 in the afternoon, Mona, with shining eyes, pulled Roan to shop until 9 o'clock in the evening. Although the two of them ate and drank continuously in the middle, and also rested in restaurants and other places, Roan still felt that he was about to collapse, not physically, but mentally. Because Mona had been shopping, but didn't buy much, she wanted to experience the novelty of seeing new clothes and new bags while shopping. The next day, on the plane from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, Mona and Lassie sat together, happily discussing the shopping experience yesterday. Luo An sat by the window, looking at the scenery below the plane. His eyes were straight and dull. Winslow, who had experienced it, saw this scene, waved his hand, and asked the stewardess for a glass of juice, patted Luo An on the shoulder, and handed him the juice, and smiled. "You'll get used to it." Los Angeles, FBI branch building, Special Investigation Team office area. "Everyone, let's not waste any more nonsense. Our next priority is to deal with the follow-up of the case." Luo An pulled over a whiteboard, gave a brief explanation of the follow-up work of the 26 deaths in the villa case, and then distributed the folders to the agents one by one. "Hey, wait a minute." After all the folders were distributed, Lassie looked at the pile on Mona's desk, the pile on Michelle's desk, and then the 3 piles on her desk. She raised her hand and looked at Roan. "Why do I have so many?" "Because Chanel took a temporary leave to go home. Please help me." Roan pointed to the empty seat next to Winslow not far away. Chanel's parents had some health problems and flew home to visit them. "I know Chanel took a leave. Chanel did not board the plane from Las Vegas to Los Angeles." Lassie knew about this. Mona was puzzled. Even if Chanel's work was given to her, it would be 2 piles of folders. Why was there another pile? "Oh, you mean that?" Luo An suddenly realized and said calmly, "The extra pile is mine." Lassie tilted her head in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. I have to go to the team leader for a meeting, and these files will be handed over to you." Luo An smiled and patted Lassie's shoulder, then made a come on gesture to her with both fists, and then turned and walked out of the special investigation team office area. Seeing Luo An disappear, Lassie's eyelids twitched, and Winslow next to her chuckled and asked, "Lassie, did you do something to make Luo An unhappy?" "How should I know?" Lassie scratched her head with a look of pain in her face, a look of pain in her chest. Mona laughed, patted Lassie's shoulder, and then took a few folders from Lassie to herself. Michelle and Winslow also took a few copies to themselves, and the folders in front of the four people became evenly distributed. HMPH. Lacey snorted as she turned her head towards Roan's back, then stood up and walked to a nearby empty desk, picked up a bunch of snacks Roan had just bought, distributed them to everyone, and then began to eat while handling the follow-up work of the case. Roan, who was familiar with the special investigation team's agents, knew what the scene in the office area would become without thinking. It was just a joke with Lacey. He walked to the door of the team supervisor's office and knocked on the door. After receiving permission, he walked in. Today, the team supervisor Potent Burn did not sit behind the desk to process documents as usual, but stood in front of the bookshelf next to him, carefully reading a case record. Roan's expression remained unchanged, and he smiled. "Good afternoon, sir." "Good afternoon." Potent Burn closed the case record, raised his head, and smiled at Roan, stretched out his hand to signal Roan to sit down, and said with a smile, "Roan, you really made a big splash this time." Roan looked puzzled, and Potent Burn laughed, leaned back and crossed his legs, and said, "What happened in the Odell family villa is no secret, and many people want to know what the local law enforcement agencies in Las Vegas will do. But I didn't expect that the controller of the Odell family of this generation would actually ask your special investigation team to handle this matter, and your special investigation team solved the case in less than 2 weeks, which really opened the eyes of many people. For some people in the upper echelons, they knew the details of the case not long after Roan solved the case. Seeing Roan leading the special investigation team to handle the case, many people began to envy Verenus and Potent Burn's good luck. Why don't they have talents like Roan? Roan grinned and briefly described the investigation and handling of the case. Potent Burn nodded repeatedly when he heard that Roan used the information gap to dig a hole for Hector Jamie. Potent Burn applauded with a smile on his face. "Oh, by the way, a team leader of the Las Vegas FBI branch talked to me yesterday." Roan finished his narration, and Potent Burn mentioned the matter of Fiona. "However, this matter is a little complicated. Someone was sent over there to apologize first. It may take some time to deal with it later." Potent Burn signaled Roan not to worry. Roan laughed when he heard this. Good food is never afraid of being late. He is never in a hurry about such things. "Good." Potent Burn nodded with satisfaction. The two continued to chat for a while. Roan got up and left the office. The next 2 days are Saturday weekends. He needs to go with Mona to see the villa that Javery bought and move. "I will start a new case tomorrow, and I'm searching and organizing the information." In addition, the federal government is indeed full of talented people, especially Florida, which really does not keep idle people. Chapter 464, Villa Moving, Party, and News on TV. Saturday, 9 a.m., Los Angeles FBI branch building, a high-end community 10 kilometers south. Wow. According to the address left by Javery, Luo An drove Mona to the community. When they got off the car and looked at the villa in front of them, Luo An sighed, and Mona's eyes lit up. In front of the two was a villa with a very obvious European style, with 2 floors, a pointed roof, and crimson roof tiles that were very eye-catching in the sun. Entering the gate, there was a cobblestone path between the lush grass beside the road for vehicles. Follow the path to the door of the villa, step on the marble steps to open the door of the villa, and the first thing that comes into view is the living room with a high ceiling and large windows. The sunlight is very sufficient, which makes people feel excited. The interior structure of the villa combines simplicity and richness, with bright tiles like mirrors, gorgeous crystal chandeliers, and red and black fragrant wood furniture. It is elegant and exquisite, but also comfortable. The main and guest bedrooms, study and other rooms are equipped with floor-to-ceiling low windows for viewing. The restaurant is connected from north to south, and the indoor and outdoor scenes are perfectly integrated. This villa seems a bit big. Mona took the key and walked around carefully with a smile on her face, but she said, "It might be too lonely for the two of us to live here." After saying that, Mona turned around and didn't see Luo An. After a careful look, she found Luo An in the master bedroom, squatting on the floor fiddling with something. Mona was puzzled. "Luo An, what are you doing?" "Nothing, I'm just measuring the size of this bed." Luo An stood up, looked at the 2.5 by 2 meter bed in the master bedroom and smiled, put his arm around Mona, pointed at the bed and said, "This bed is so big, it's a waste for you to sleep alone. I'll help you, we'll sleep together at night." When they lived in a hotel outside, Luo An and Mona lived together. But when they returned to the rental house in Los Angeles, Mona asked them to sleep in separate rooms, which made Luo An, who was used to sleeping with Mona in his arms at night, feel very unhappy, so he decided to move to this villa. Mona rolled her eyes, crossed her arms, and made a big X on her chest. "No. This bedroom is mine, and the guest room next door belongs to you. That's it." The reason why Mona always forced Luo An to sleep in separate rooms was more to maintain the freshness and excitement between the two of them. This was something she learned from Lassie. In addition, Luo An was sometimes too much, and Mona needed to rest herself. At the same time, she was also considering Luo An's health. Luo An blinked and didn't continue to dwell on this topic. Anyway, he lived next door and could come over anytime at night. "Oh, right." Mona suddenly patted her head, turned to look at Luo An with a smile, and said, "After all, we are going to live in this new villa. Just in case, I called the lock company before. They will be here soon, and they will replace all the doors in this villa with new locks. I also requested that the locks of our master bedroom and guest bedroom be replaced with combination locks. Before the lock company arrives, you should think about the combination lock of your guest bedroom first, and what to set the password." After saying that, Mona smiled and patted Luo An's head gently, then hummed a song, and turned to leave the master bedroom. Looking at Mona swaying back, Luo An's face was full of speechlessness. But he didn't take it to heart, just as a little game between the two of them. And the room with the combination lock. Luo An rubbed his hands. He felt more excited. Behind the kitchen on the first floor of the villa, there is a small European-style arched corridor, which leads directly to the garage and warehouse. Luo An and Mona thought that there was nothing inside, but they didn't expect that there were two brand new Ford cars, one black and one white. They called Jolie to ask, and found out that these two cars were also bought by Jolie. The white Ford car was given to Mona by Jolie because Mona's current car was just a second-hand car worth less than $5,000, and Jolie couldn't stand it. As for the black Ford car, Jolie said on the phone, "Luo An, it's okay if you want to drive that car, but you have to transfer the money I paid for the car to me first. It's not expensive, just $150,000. Snap. Luo An hung up the phone directly. He suddenly became deaf and didn't hear what Jolie said later. He only knew that Jolie said that the car belonged to him. Seeing this, Mona threw a pair of sanitary balls to Roan, pinched Roan's arm gently, then took out her phone and pressed the button, saying, "You can come over." "Okay, let's go now." The other end of the phone was the moving company that the two had contacted before. Although Roan and Mona had not been in Los Angeles for a long time, they had already accumulated a lot of things. Especially Mona. Her clothes filled two large wardrobes, and she also occupied one of the two wardrobes in Roan's room. Roan was speechless about this, because he had never seen Mona wear many of the clothes. Not long after buying them, Mona said that the style was outdated, and she wanted to buy new ones, and then she kept repeating this behavior. Fortunately, Mona was only interested in new clothes, and had little interest in more expensive bags, cosmetics, etc. So Roan didn't say much about it, just hoping that the cloakroom in this villa was big enough, and could last for a while. For Franklin's sake, the moving company handled everything for Roan and Mona before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. According to the customs of the federal people, moving into a new home requires a party. At 8 o'clock in the evening, the queue began. There were not many people coming. Amid the cheerful music, a group of people gathered in twos and threes to drink and chat. As the host of the party, Luo An and Mona held wine glasses and chatted with men and women. together with several male detectives from the trace examination department. They talked about several anecdotes and fun things they encountered in the cases. Everyone laughed. Luo An took the wine glass and prepared to go to the kitchen to get ice cubes. At this moment, the music in the room was suddenly turned off. Everyone turned to look at the place where the music was turned off and found that the person was Agent Tony from the trace examination department. Agent Tony chuckled, pointed to the TV in the living room and said, "Everyone, look who's on the news again." Everyone cast their eyes on the TV that was playing in the living room, where a blonde female host said with a smile, FBI team leader Owen Greenwood successfully led the special investigation team to solve the sensational Oddle family villa murder case and caught the real murderer. Oh, Roan. Yeah. Clap, clap, clap. All the guests turned their eyes to Roan, and loud cheers, whistles, and applause rang out in the living room of the villa. "Thank you." Luo An smiled, raised his glass and said loudly, "This is not the credit of me alone. The successful solution of the case is inseparable from the efforts of everyone in the special investigation team. Thank you all. In addition, the barbecue will be ready soon, and beer, red wine, champagne and all kinds of wine are ready. Everyone should not go home until they are drunk tonight." After Luo An finished speaking, the guests raised their glasses, smiled and shouted in unison, "Don't go home until you are drunk." Bang! Lassie suddenly opened a bottle of champagne, and the wine splashed on the people around her. Amid screams, laughter and scolding, the joyful atmosphere in the living room of the villa became a bit stronger. Chapter 465. Review of all gains, tax issues, new cases. On Sunday morning, Mona was wearing Roan's white shirt on her upper body, with her long white legs bare underneath. She was wearing furry slippers, smiling, humming music and making breakfast. Roan was sitting at the dining table, yawning and tapping on the laptop in front of him. Mona put the sandwich, fried egg and milk breakfast on the dining table, sat opposite Roan, and asked while eating, "What are you doing?" Roan took the breakfast and thanked her softly, then replied, "I'm calculating and sorting out my current assets. It's almost time to pay taxes every year." When it comes to paying taxes, Roan couldn't help but frown and rub his temples with his hand. On the internet in the Far East, someone listed several suicidal behaviors in the world: Eastern separatism, federal tax evasion, Mexican separatism prohibition, and hostage taking in the Bear Country. For federal taxpayers, April 15th is an important date. They need to submit their personal income tax returns and pay the corresponding taxes before this day. These taxes include wage income tax, self-employment tax, investment income tax and a lot of other taxes. Now it was 2006, and Luo An needed to calculate his gains from last year. In terms of fixed assets, Luo An currently had a small apartment in New York, a Chevrolet sedan, a large villa in Boston, an orange sports car, and a Dodge Hellcat. In terms of current assets, Luo An bought stocks of Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon for about $5 million, which is now worth nearly $9 million. When he was in the number 5 investigation team, and since he led the special investigation team, Luo An's salary, bonuses, and extra gains after solving cases totaled nearly $27 million. In the case of Mona's father, Luo An got nearly 200 million euros from the casino and the gangster, which is currently in an overseas account. In addition to these obvious gains, Luo An also got $300 million in flash memory chips in the previous bank robbery, which is currently lying in some accounts in the Cayman Islands. Looking at the 200 million euros won from the gambling in the computer records, and the $300 million in the chip in his mind that was not recorded on the computer, Luo An frowned slightly and whispered to himself, "It is true that other ways to make money are faster. The speed of making money by solving cases is too slow." Hearing this, Mona, who was sitting opposite him, twitched her eyes and almost choked on the sandwich in her mouth. Mona currently has 40 million euros in overseas accounts. Javari gave her $10 million US, the FBI salary, bonus, and extra gains after solving the case added up to nearly $6 million US. Before meeting Luo An, Mona had never thought that her savings could exceed 5 figures. For a long time, she felt that the numbers in her account were not real. Only when she took the initiative and bit Luo An's lips tightly did Mona know that this was not a dream. Mona is not a greedy person. Mona doesn't know how much money Luo An has made, and she is not interested in asking about it. Anyway, it must be more than her. But when Mona heard that Roan, who was richer than her and made money several times faster than everyone she knew, actually complained that she made money too slowly, she was immediately furious and could not hold back. After finishing her sandwich in a few bites, Mona reached out and grabbed Roan's sandwich and took a bite. Roan, who was about to eat breakfast, was stunned for a moment, with a puzzled look on his face. "What do you mean?" "Humph." Mona snorted coldly and said nothing. She didn't know the words pretending and versatiles, but Roan's words just now made her very unhappy, so Mona unilaterally decided that Roan would not have breakfast today. Too lazy to pay attention to Mona, Roan ate the fried eggs in a few bites, drank a glass of milk, and then began to think carefully about his tax problems. Roan didn't say anything after breakfast. He chose to ignore Mona, who was tempting him with her big white legs. He picked up his phone and called Lexa Rodell and John Rodriguez, asking them for the phone numbers of several reliable accounting firms. For the next week, the special investigation team lived a 9-to-5 life every day. It looks busy, but it's actually very relaxed. Because there are no new cases and no urgent tasks, Luo An has been leading the detectives to handle the follow-up of the case slowly and not late or leave early, just slacking off. Soon, it was another new Saturday. A well-known local accounting firm in Los Angeles came up with a tax payment plan based on Luo An's assets. In the plan, the other party pressed the tax that Luo An needed to pay to the point that Luo An himself was embarrassed. In this regard, among the two accountants in the accounting firm who were responsible for Luo An, the bald middle-aged white man on the left said with a smile, "Please rest assured, Mr. Greenwood, this tax avoidance plan is absolutely in line with federal laws. Our accounting firm has always abided by the law and will never do anything that violates the law." The middle-aged white man with a big belly on the right also smiled and whispered to Luo An that many wealthy people in the Federation legally avoid taxes more every year, and Luo An is nothing compared to those people. Okay. Looking at the two thick-faced and black-hearted guys in front of him, Luo An showed a satisfied smile on his face, stretched out his hand and shook hands with them. "Thank you. This is what we should do." The two middle-aged white men stretched out their hands and shook hands with Luo An and laughed with Luo An. Driving away from this street, looking at the rearview mirror, several familiar stars also entered the building. Luo An's mouth corners slightly raised, and he could only say that the Federation is worthy of being a capitalist country, a paradise for the rich and a hell for the poor. After the tax matters were dealt with, Luo An felt relieved. That night, in the villa, there was a candlelight dinner, music and red wine, and after kissing Mona for a while, Luo An suddenly pressed her against the glass. Mona's eyes widened instantly and she struggled. "Luo An, let's go to bed." "It's okay, trust me." Luo An bit Mona's ear, took out a remote control and pressed it, and chuckled. "I just found out last night that this is a one-way glass that can be remotely controlled." It was Monday, and the sun was shining brightly in Los Angeles, but the mood of the detectives of the special investigation team was a little gloomy. On the one hand, there was a new case, and on the other hand, the victim of this case was a little special. Chanel had returned to the team today. Roan waved his hand, signaling her to distribute the information in the folder to everyone. Then Roan said with a serious face, "Everyone, the victim of today's case is Paul Osborne, 16 years old. He disappeared last night. Someone called the police and found his body early this morning. Paul's father, Lyndon Osborne, is the former team leader of our FBI Los Angeles branch. He has been retired for less than a year. We need to investigate this case carefully to determine whether the murderer's target is Paul Osborne or his father, Lyndon Osborne." "Oh, shit." All the agents listened to Roan's words carefully, but when they took the photos in the folder, they couldn't help but show ugly expressions, and Lassie cursed directly. In the photo, 16-year-old Paul Osborne looked like a livestock waiting to be slaughtered, with his head facing down and his feet tied high up. There was a long wound from his lower abdomen to his chin. This teenager opened his heart directly on the physical level. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 466, The Case of the Former Team Leader's Son Being Dissected by Explosion. At 10 a.m. on Monday, and Sav was speeding along the highway in Los Angeles. Winslow was driving the car, Lassie was sitting in the passenger seat, sorting out the prosecutor's equipment, and Roan was sitting in the back seat, sorting out the equipment, while carefully checking the case documents. Next to Roan was the team leader Potentburn. Potentburn's face was very gloomy. After a long silence, he turned his head and said seriously, "Roan, thank you for your hard work this time, the special investigation team. You must catch the murderer." The deceased this time was Paul, the only son of the former team leader, Lyndon Osborne. Lyndon had retired for less than a year, and now his son was hung upside down and disemboweled. The death was very tragic. It was hard not to think that this was the murderer's revenge on Lyndon. Potentburn and Lyndon Osborne had known each other for many years and had a good relationship. Potent was able to take the current position of team leader with the help of Lyndon. In addition, as the team leader, Potentburn had more things to think about. For example, will the murderer target other retired FBI personnel? When Lyndon Osborne retired, many people retired with him. Even more, will the murderer target current personnel, such as other team supervisors or other investigation team leaders? We will do our best, sir. Roan closed the folder and nodded. He had been thinking about why the murderer hung 16-year-old Paul upside down and disemboweled him. Was it just torture, or did it have other meanings? Roan also suspected that the murderer in this case was targeting Lyndon Osborne, so he planned to ask for a list of people with whom he had a deeper grudge to see if he could find anything. Winslow drove very steadily and arrived at Lyndon Osborne's home not long after. This is a duplex villa that is very common in Los Angeles. There are 2 lawns in front and behind the villa. There is also a swing and a round table on the corridor of the front door, which gives people a very warm feeling. The SUV slowly stopped at the side of the road. Potentburn got out of the car without hesitation, and Winslow and Lassie also opened the car door. At this moment, the familiar burning sensation came again. Roan's heart jumped suddenly, and he quickly reached out and grabbed Potentburn's arm and shouted at the same time, "Something is wrong. Everyone hurry back to the car." Winslow and Lassie trembled when they heard the words. The two who believed in Roan in their hearts quickly turned around and prepared to return to the SUV, while Potentburn subconsciously stopped and turned his head. Boom. The next second, a deafening explosion suddenly erupted. Orange-red flames shot up into the sky. Bricks, wooden boards and rubble flew everywhere, and the villa, that was still warm and cozy just now, instantly turned into ruins, and the cars on the whole street hummed and called. The moment the explosion sounded, the experienced Winslow and Lassie subconsciously lowered their heads and bent down. The two were not seriously injured, but were hit by a few pieces of wooden debris. Potentburn was a step late and did not return to the car in time. He was hit hard by the shock wave of the explosion and his back was hit hard by several flying bricks. The only one who was not injured was Roan, who did not get out of the car at all. However, his body was covered with broken glass. Because the distance was too close, the shock wave of the explosion blew all the windows of the SUV into pieces. Fouquet, Potentburn, whose clothes and hair were covered with dust, did not care about the pain in his back. While cursing, he quickly got up from the ground and turned to run towards the villa. At this time, the second floor of the villa had disappeared, leaving only the first floor of the villa burning with flames. The black explosion marks and grey smoke were the only things left here. Son of Eat. Winslow and Lassie, who were also covered with dust, quickly got up from the ground and looked very unhappy when they saw this scene. Seeing Potentburn running towards the villa regardless of the possible second explosion, Winslow and Lassie pretended to chase him. Roan quickly jumped out of the car, grabbed the two of them, and said quickly, "Lassie, call the ambulance, the trace examination department, and the anti-improvised explosive device department, and tell them to hurry up and come to the scene as quickly as possible." Winslow, you maintain order at the scene, and don't let irrelevant people enter the scene. In addition, observe the people at the scene carefully, and arrest any suspicious people on the spot. The sudden explosion scared everyone. The cars parked on the street honked their horns randomly. Many passers-by also shouted God while coming over, and some took out their phones to call 911. Considering that the cause of the explosion is currently unknown, but the murderer who caused the explosion is likely to come to the scene to check his masterpiece, Roan asked Winslow, who is more experienced, to maintain order. Understood. Lassie nodded heavily and took out her mobile phone. Winslow also instantly understood what Roan meant and turned around to stop those who wanted to approach the scene. The two began to act, and Roan quickly ran towards the villa where the flames were burning. Roan, who had a keen sense of smell, not only smelled the smell of burning wood here, but also smelled an indescribable smell of barbecue. Considering that Roan had called Lyndon before coming here with potent burn, and the other party said that he and his wife were at home, there was no need to say more about what the smell of barbecue on the scene meant. As for potent burn, Roan now just wanted to pull him out of the villa first. The former team leader was likely to have died in the explosion, and Roan didn't want to find that the team leader also died here. Sir. Roan raised his leg to step over a broken arm burning with flames, and his eyes twitched. He quickly ran to Potent Burn and grabbed his arm. It's too dangerous here. It's okay. Potent Burn shook his head. His face was ugly to death. He walked quickly in the ruins, searched for a while, and finally found a part of the former team leader Lyndon Osborne under a collapsed wooden board. As for Lyndon Osborne's wife, she was scattered on the walls and ground around Potent Burn. While Potent Burn was searching everywhere, Roan also found a smashed laptop under a burning board. After a quick look, he found that the hard drive was fine, so Roan put the computer away and prepared to ask Mona to investigate the situation in the computer. 10 minutes later, LAPD, Los Angeles Fire Department, FBI Trace Examination Division, FBI Anti-Improvised Explosive Device Division and others arrived at the scene. While the fire department was holding tools to put out the fire, the ubiquitous group of reporters in Los Angeles also ran here, holding microphones and cameras to film the scene. Team leader Potent Burn took a look at the ruins of the villa, took a deep breath, patted Roan on the shoulder, and handed the scene to him, and then walked directly to the group of reporters without cleaning the dust on his body, and answered their questions expressionlessly. It's a troubled autumn, winter. Looking at the messy scene in front of him, Luo An rubbed his temples. His son was disemboweled, and his father and mother were killed in the explosion. Now there is no need to guess. The murderer is targeting the Lyndon family. Seeing several agents from the anti-IED department coming out with a bunch of things, Luo An hurried forward and asked, "What's in it? Have you found the cause of the explosion?" "Hello, Team Leader Greenwood." The leading anti-IED agent nodded and explained, "We found traces of SEM-10 explosive fragments, batteries, and circuits at the scene. The bomb was detonated by radio frequency signals. When the explosion occurred, the murderer was definitely not too far away from the villa." The agent went on to say that judging from the layout of the villa, the explosion occurred in Paul's room. When the explosion occurred, the distance between the two victims and the bomb was definitely no more than 1.5 meters. Okay. Luo An nodded and was about to continue asking questions. The agent from the Trace Examination Department suddenly came over. "Team Leader Greenwood, we found some items that may be able to help with this case." Chapter 467, Discovery of the crime scene, Investigation direction, clues. Taking the box handed over by the agent of the Trace Examination Department, Roan found a half-burnt diary, a dusty handheld video recorder, a computer hard drive connected to the home surveillance, and some other miscellaneous items. "Good, thank you for your hard work." Roan nodded, patted the agent of the Trace Examination Department on the shoulder, and then pointed to Lassie not far away, indicating that the agent should hand over some of the things inside to her, and the rest would be handed over to the Trace Examination Department as usual. Half an hour later, the bodies of the two victims were cleaned up and taken away. There was nothing else found at the scene, so Roan and others drove away. When assigning tasks before, Roan led Winslow and Lassie to Lyndon's house, planning to ask Lyndon for information. Chanel, Mona and Michelle were sent by Roan to the scene of the death of 16-year-old boy Paul. Unlike Roan and his 3 friends who encountered a sudden explosion, Chanel and his 3 friends' investigation went smoothly, and they completed the investigation and returned to the special investigation team before Roan and his friends. After learning about the explosion, Mona, who had been waiting for a long time, breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that Roan and the other 2 only had dirty clothes with a lot of dust on them, but no physical injuries. After handing the electronic items found at the explosion site to Mona, Roan entered the team leader's office, changed into a new coat, and then walked to the whiteboard at the front of the office area with a pen, looked at Chinya, and asked, "How was your investigation along the way?" Chinya stood up, frowned, and replied, "We have found a lot of things at the scene of Paul's death." The scene of Paul's death was in a long-abandoned tire factory in northwest Los Angeles. According to the investigation of the trace examination department, Paul's back of the head had traces of being hit by a heavy object, and the tool was also found, which was a bloody hammer in the corner of the crime scene. There was also a needle hole on Paul's right arm. When the trace examination department performed an autopsy, it was found that the other party had been anesthetized before his death. At the same time, there were obvious signs of struggle at the location, where the other party's feet were tied and hung, indicating that Paul was still conscious at the time. Lassie frowned when she heard this and asked, "You mean, Paul was still conscious when he was cut open by the murderer?" Chinya nodded solemnly. "This possibility is very high. Son of... damn it." Winslow and Lassie went cursed with ugly faces when they heard this. Luo An's expression remained unchanged and then asked, "Are there any other discoveries?" "No at the moment." Chinya shook her head. The murderer was very careful. No footprints or fingerprints were found at the scene of the crime, and there was no surveillance in the nearby area. The person who reported this case was a homeless man who continued to pick up rubbish in that area. He was frightened by the upside-down body at the time, but he did not find any other suspicious people or suspicious vehicles. As for Paul, he went out with a few friends the day before yesterday and suddenly disappeared on his way home at night. Those friends had no clues. Lyndon and his wife immediately called the police and contacted the FBI. But there was no surveillance at the place where Paul disappeared, and there were no witnesses nearby, so the FBI and LAPD did not find anything. It was not until yesterday that the homeless man called the police that they found the missing Paul. "Okay." Luo An turned around and pasted the photos of Lyndon's wife, and son Paul on the top of the whiteboard. Then he wrote the cause of their death below the 3 people, bomb, and disembowelment. After finishing writing, Luo An threw the whiteboard pen aside and said sternly, "Everyone, the murderer behind this case is obviously targeting the family of the former team leader, Lyndon Osborne. We will mainly investigate in 2 directions. First, investigate the cases that Lyndon Osborne has handled during his years at the FBI, and check for suspects who have a deep hatred for Lyndon and are very likely to attack him. Especially those who have been released from prison in the past year, or those who have suffered major changes in the past year. Second, the agent of the anti-improvised explosive device department told me that the bomb exploded in Paul's room. Lyndon and his wife could not have run to their son's room with the bomb, so there are only 2 possibilities. One is that the bomb was secretly hidden in Paul's room by the murderer, and the other is that Paul took the bomb back without knowing it. So we will carefully check the surveillance before the explosion of the villa, and at the same time check Paul's life experience, who he had conflicts with in school, who he had contacted, and who he had contacted on the internet. Understood. Luo An's analysis was simple and direct. The agents did not find any problems, so they all nodded and agreed. Roan first left the special investigation team and went to the office of the team leader Potent Burn to explain the situation to him and asked to review all the cases that Lyndon Osborne had handled before his death. Potent Burn agreed without hesitation. Roan returned to the special investigation team with authority and asked Michelle to log into the FBI internal network to start checking clues. Winslow, Chanel, and Lassie went to Paul's school, Lyndon's neighbors and other places to conduct offline investigations. Roan began to look through the diary found by the trace examination department at the crime scene. But unfortunately, Lyndon was a serious man. This diary was not his, but his wife's. There were no other useful clues except some complaints. After a long pause, Roan turned his eyes to Mona. He had previously handed over all the computers he found at the crime scene and the electronic equipment found by the trace examination department at the crime scene to her. I did find some clues here, but they seem a bit complicated. Mona rubbed her sore eyes and pointed to the computer on the table and said, the computer found in the trace examination department, which is linked to the home surveillance, records what happened before the explosion. The surveillance had no sound. The picture showed that sometime before the explosion, Lyndon's wife had been sitting on the sofa crying. Lyndon was angry, but he still hugged his wife and kept comforting her. Suddenly, the two seemed to hear something, and they all looked up at the stairs. After a few words, Lyndon and his wife went up the stairs to the second floor and entered their son Paul's room. The scene in the room could not be seen due to the angle of the surveillance. 3 seconds later, the explosion occurred, and the surveillance went black instantly. After watching the surveillance video, Luo An frowned slightly. Before he could speak, Mona continued, this surveillance video is automatically overwritten every 7 days. During these 7 days, the surveillance video did not detect anyone sneaking into the villa. In addition, the handheld video recorder is useless. It only contains videos of Lyndon's family, including several birthday party videos and other daily videos. But I did find some interesting things in the laptop you found. Mona tapped on the keyboard with her 10 fingers, and soon a long list appeared on her computer screen. Mona pointed at the list and explained, the laptop you found belonged to Lyndon. The list was created 2 hours after the couple received the news of Paul's murder. I checked the first name on the list, Miller Merman, who is a notorious monopoly dealer. Among the names behind him, there are assassins, intelligence dealers, serial killers, bombers. They are not ordinary people. A group of talented names. Luo An raised his eyebrows and said suddenly, so, this list is most likely the people who Lyndon recalled and checked before his death. Those who hated him, and might have done something to his son Paul. That's right. Mona nodded, picked up the coffee, and took a sip. Luo An narrowed his eyes, and looked at the names of these talents in thought. Michelle, who was not far away, suddenly raised his hand and said hesitantly, Luo An, I seem to have found a clue here, or a problem. Chapter 468, Remote Control Distance of Bombs and Methods of Leaving the Scene. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Hearing Michelle say that she had a new discovery, Luo An quickly moved to her side. What did you find? Michelle pointed to the screen in the computer and said, Lyndon Osborne has retired, but the FBI internal database shows that he had a new file to be built some time ago. The so-called file to be built is an investigation file that each FBI investigation team must create in the FBI internal database as soon as possible when preparing to handle a new case in accordance with the rules. In other words, although Lyndon Osborne has officially retired, he still has a case under investigation. However, when Michelle opened this file to be built, it was blank and there was nothing in it, so she had previously suspected whether it was a clue or a problem, and it was possible that there was a program loophole in the FBI internal database. The possibility of a loophole is not very high. Mona heard Michelle's doubts, put her hands on her hips, and said with pride, in the past, there were indeed many program loopholes in the FBI internal database, but since I joined the FBI, the programmers in the logistics department have been working overtime and their skills have gradually improved. Now it is basically impossible for loopholes in these basic programs to occur. X2. Roan and Michelle looked at Mona speechlessly. After a long silence, Roan motioned Mona and Michelle to continue investigating, and he went to the office of Potent Burn's team leader again. Seeing the new situation brought by Roan, Potent Burn was also stunned for a moment, and then frowned slightly and said, I don't know about this. Roan's expression did not change, and he continued, the cause of this explosion may be related to Chief Lyndon's secret investigation of this case during his lifetime. I understand. Potent Burn nodded solemnly. Killing the former head of the FBI team is not a trivial matter. The fact that the other party dared to do this shows that the murderer or the mastermind is definitely not an ordinary person. On the other hand, it also shows that the other party has reasons to kill Lyndon Osborne. Before, Potent Bind's thoughts and guesses were the same as Roan's. They both suspected that this was one of Lyndon Osborne's enemies who wanted revenge on him. but the new clues discovered now provide the two with a new possibility. Lyndon Osborne is very likely to have discovered something while secretly investigating something, or someone discovered that he was investigating, so he was silenced. Potent Bind pressed down Roan's folder and said seriously, "I'll handle this matter. I'll inform you as soon as I find out." "Okay, sir." Luo An nodded, then briefly narrated a few sentences, and immediately turned around and left the team leader's office. When he reached the door of the office, Luo An calmly glanced at Potent Burn, who was frowning and thinking behind the desk, and then closed the door and walked towards the elevator not far away. Before coming to the team leader's office, Luo An had asked Michelle to make a secret backup of the clue she found. One is to simply make a backup just in case, and the other is that Luo An felt that Potent Burn's condition seemed to be a little bit wrong. Potent Burn has always given Luo An the impression of being shrewd, calm, and steady, thick-faced and black-hearted. Before the explosion, Potent Burn ran to the ruins desperately to search, and it seemed that he was in a hurry to find someone to save people. But from another perspective, could it be that Potent Burn wanted to search and take something without Luo An's knowledge? And this file to be built found by Michelle, Potent Burn, as the team leader, said that he didn't know about it. In the elevator, Roan closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. Plan A to Plan 99 flashed through his mind, and finally he whispered to himself, "I hope my guess is wrong." Ding, the elevator door opened. Roan opened his eyes, and his usual kind smile appeared on his face again. He greeted and nodded to the passing agents. As soon as he walked into the Special Investigation Team office area, he saw Mona holding up her mobile phone and shouting, "Roan, Chanel and Winslow have made a new discovery." Roan walked quickly to Mona. "What's the specific situation?" Mona handed the phone to Roan, and Chanel on the other end of the phone explained, "This is thanks to the agents of the Anti-Improvised Explosive Device Department for providing us with clues. Not long ago, when dealing with the explosion at the villa, 2 agents from the anti-IED unit determined that the bomb at the scene was a radio frequency signal detonated bomb, and said that the remote controller was not far away from the bomb when it exploded. When Chenier and Winslow visited the area around the explosion scene, the anti-IED unit had completed the test of the remote control detonation device of the bomb. The test results showed that the maximum receiving signal distance of the radio frequency signal device on the bomb was no more than 40 meters. This means that when the explosion occurred, the guy holding the remote control device was within a circle with a radius of 40 meters centered on the Lyndon Osborne villa. Chenier and Winslow, who received the exact information, immediately began to check the surveillance records within a radius of 40 meters before and after the explosion, and carefully searched for suspicious persons. After a detailed investigation, the community manager who was assisting nearby did not find any strangers or unfamiliar faces, but found a car that started and left the community immediately after the explosion. Chenier and Winslow immediately began to investigate the identity of the owner of the car and drove to the other party's home. According to the investigation, the owner of the suspicious vehicle was a male computer network after-sales service worker with a great figure. The villa belonged to a rich second-generation man. When the explosion occurred, the owner was repairing the computer and network for the woman who had been dating the rich second-generation man for a long time. But this lie was quickly exposed by the experienced Chenier and Winslow, because the tools in the car were not opened at all, and there was a smell of perfume that did not belong to him on the other party's clothes. Under the interrogation of Winslow and Chenier, the after-sales service worker finally told the truth. He was indeed not going to repair the computer today, but the rich second-generation man was not at home today. He had been dating the woman for a long time and took the opportunity to go to the villa to play games with the woman today. Okay. After listening to Chenier's narration, Mona's eyes flashed with contempt, Michelle's mouth corners slightly hooked, and Luo An's expression remained unchanged and asked, "So, this guy who likes to steal houses is not the murderer of the remote-controlled bomb, right?" "That's right." Winslow's business was replaced by that of the other end of the phone. He laughed and said, "It's indeed not him. This guy is very timid." When he learned that Chanel and I are from the FBI, his legs immediately became weak with fear. The reason why his legs are weak may not be because he was scared by you. Luo An said casually, and Michelle then asked, what is the relationship between the murderer of the remote-controlled bomb explosion and this maintenance worker? Hearing Roan's words, Winslow was slightly stunned, and then the corners of his mouth rose to answer Michelle's question. When inspecting the after-sales service personnel's vehicle, Winslow found that there was a gap among the messy tools in the trunk of the other party's car. When asking the after-sales service personnel, the other party said that he didn't know why this happened. This old car made noises everywhere except the horn, and he hadn't opened the trunk of the car today. Thinking that when the explosion occurred, the car happened to be within a radius of 50 meters, the quick-witted Chenier immediately suspected that the guy who remotely controlled the bomb explosion was very likely to have successfully entered the community by hiding in the trunk of this car. The other party remotely controlled the bomb to explode, and the explosion scared the maintenance personnel. Because he was worried that the rich second generation would come back, he quickly stopped the action, put on his clothes and drove away. The murderer of the remote-controlled bomb explosion also took this opportunity to leave the community. This possibility is very high. After Winslow finished speaking, Roan narrowed his eyes slightly, immediately looked at Mona, and said, Mona, check the itinerary of this car, and focus on the time when he stopped at the traffic light. What do you mean? Michelle and Winslow did not react, but Mona's eyes lit up and nodded heavily. I understand. Chapter 469. The suspect was found, the arrest began, and suddenly there was an explosion. What? Hearing Luo An's words, Winslow and Cheney were stunned. They had originally planned to take the old car driven by the after-sales service staff back to the FBI and let the agents of the trace examination department carefully check the situation in the trunk of the car. Maybe they could find some useful clues. It's not that troublesome. While Mona was typing frantically, Luo An explained, while the car is moving, the murderer certainly can't just open the trunk and jump out. This is not only dangerous, but also easy to attract the attention of the driver and others. So if the murderer of the remote-controlled bomb is really hiding in the trunk of the car, he has only two options: either quietly open the trunk and sneak away when the car is waiting for the traffic light, or wait for the maintenance personnel to arrive at home or the company parking lot and then open the trunk and leave. When Luo An said this, Winslow and Michelle all reacted and suddenly said, yes, this car itself has all kinds of strange noises, and the trunk also has problems. Even if it suddenly pops open halfway, the owner will not care. And the latter plan takes a long time and has a high chance of being discovered, so the murderer is likely to choose the former plan. That's right. Luo An confirmed Winslow's subsequent speculation. There was silence on the other end of the phone for a few seconds. Chenier glanced at the after-sales service staff with a sad face not far away and asked, what should we do with this car? Take it back to the FBI Los Angeles branch building. Luo An did not hesitate and answered, let the trace examination department check the situation in the trunk. If we find the murderer and the murderer refuses to admit it, as long as we find useful clues in the trunk, we can make him speak up. Understood. Chenier nodded heavily and then hung up the phone. After the car left the community where the explosion occurred, the route it took was not complicated. Most of the intersections were monitored. With the cooperation of Mona and Michelle, they quickly checked these intersections. There were 3 intersections without surveillance cameras. Mona and Michelle checked them one by one, and soon found something. Luo An, this is the second intersection without surveillance cameras, 11 minutes after the explosion. Mona's 10 fingers flew on the keyboard, zooming in on the video on the computer screen, and said, this is a picture from the latest Cadillac dashcam. The red light came on at the intersection ahead, and the Cadillac slowly stopped behind the 3 taxis. In the lower left corner of the dashcam picture was the car driven by the after-sales service staff. Suddenly, the trunk door of the car slowly opened, revealing a small gap. A person quickly squeezed out from inside, then closed the trunk of the car, turned around and left slowly. As expected of Los Angeles, there are so many luxury cars, Mona complained, and Luo An frowned slightly as he looked at the screen on the computer. The good news is that Winslow and Chenier were right, and his guess was also right. The guy who ran out of the trunk of the car was most likely the person who remotely controlled the bomb. The bad news is that this guy was very cautious, wearing a black hoodie, a hat and a mask. In addition to confirming that the other party was white and most likely male, no other useful information was obtained. Mona, Michelle, you carefully investigate the surveillance video in that area to see if you can find this guy. Luo An patted Mona and Michelle on the shoulders, then took out his mobile phone and called Lassie, asking her to go to the area for a field investigation. No problem. After listening to Luo An's narration, Lassie immediately nodded and agreed. At the same time, she also told the clues she had found. I got a piece of information at the school where Paul studied. Some time ago, a female classmate of Paul saw Paul take a large package from a man and take it home. The man was white, of medium build, about 175 centimeter tall. The female classmate didn't see his specific appearance, but saw 2 complex tattoos on his arm. The female classmate didn't ask Paul what the package was, but I suspect that the package is very likely to contain the bomb. I don't know what the other party used to deceive Paul and let Paul take the package home. Thank you for your hard work. Luo An nodded with satisfaction, briefly told Lassie about the other situation, and then hung up the phone. Half an hour later, Winslow and Chenier drove the car back to the FBI Los Angeles branch building. Luo An and the two had some food, and then drove to the area where the suspect climbed out of the trunk of the car, reunited with Lassie, and the four began to investigate the area together. More than 2 hours later, Ron and Lassie, armed with a photo of the suspect wearing a black hoodie captured by Mona in the video and 2 $10 bills, successfully learned from a street vendor selling Mexican chicken rolls that the other party had opened a black car parked on the roadside and left the area. As for the license plate number of the black car, the vendor didn't remember it, but he remembered that there were 2 black stickers on the rear window of the car. Good. Ron nodded with satisfaction and told Mona this information, asking Mona and Michelle to check the car. While Ron was on the phone, Lassie took away 2 Mexican chicken rolls that the vendor had just made. The vendor owner, #%*. With the car information, Mona quickly found the other party, Ron. The car belongs to an old couple in a community in southern Los Angeles. However, the old couple rented a house some time ago, and the tenant's name in the record is Tony. I checked the real identity of the other party through the surveillance video in the nearby area. The real name of this Tony is Eneston. He is 37 years old and has just been out of prison for less than half a year. He has been a soldier and has been charged with multiple crimes such as violent injury and illegal possession of weapons. He has tattoos on his arms and back. In addition, several first-degree murders are suspected to be related to him, but there has been a lack of key evidence to identify him. The FBI internal database shows that this guy is suspected to be a killer who makes money to support himself by taking murder orders. Very good. Ron nodded with satisfaction, waved his hand to signal Winslow, Chenier, and Lassie to get in the car. Then he opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat of the car and asked, "Where is this killer now?" "In a community in southern Los Angeles." He asked Mona to contact the SWAT team and inform them to go to that area. After hanging up the phone, he saw Winslow, Chenelle, and Lassie all fastened their seat belts immediately. Ron grinned and stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. The SUV rushed into the street like a beast. Monday, 7 p.m., a community in southern Los Angeles. Because it was winter, the sun had already set, and the street lights on both sides of the road were lit up, taking on the responsibility of lighting. 2 streets across the community, the SWAT transport vehicle was in place, and all the members of the special investigation team had also arrived here. After checking all the equipment, Luo An first looked at Mona next to him. "How is the target person?" "Sorry." Mona shook her head and replied, "I can only confirm from the surveillance footage that the other party has not left the building." Luo An's expression did not change. He pressed the communicator and continued to ask, "Is the sniper in place? What is the current situation of the target person?" "The sniper is in place." The SWAT team member on the other end of the communicator replied, "The window of the bedroom, where the target person is located, is blocked by an obstacle. The window in the living room is not blocked. The target person is sitting on the sofa watching TV, but his chest and head are in the sniper blind spot." "Okay." Luo An nodded and no longer said nonsense and waved his hand directly. "Start the action." "Understood." As soon as the voice fell, a group of SWAT team members immediately rushed out of the troop carrier and headed for the building where the target person was located, followed by the fully armed special investigation team. Soon, everyone was divided into 2 teams and climbed the stairs of the building at the same time. Boom. At this moment, a deafening explosion suddenly sounded in the building. Chapter 470. 4 explosions. Jumping into the elevator shaft. Boom. The SWAT team had just blocked the 2 staircases and an elevator inside the building when a deafening explosion suddenly sounded, and the whole building seemed to shake. Are there any casualties? Luo An hurriedly asked the SWAT team members loudly, then quickly pressed the communicator and asked, Mona, where did the explosion happen? Sniper, what's the situation now? The explosion site is on the 4th floor, where the target person is. Mona, who stayed outside and was responsible for surveillance and video recording, frowned and replied while quickly typing on the keyboard, I don't know how the target person discovered our actions. As soon as Mona finished speaking, the sniper lying on the roof of another building continued, the explosion site is the target person's bedroom. The scene is now obscured by smoke and obstacles, and I can't see the situation inside. Luo An cursed in a low voice, and then ordered loudly, fully block this building. The rest of the personnel, quickly go upstairs to search for the target person. Understood. All the agents responded in unison, and the SWAT agents quickly divided into 2 groups to carry out Luo An's orders. Several agents from the special investigation team also began to search for the target person in groups of 2. Ron and Chinia were in a group. They ran up the stairs quickly with weapons in hand. When they reached the 3rd floor, Ron suddenly grabbed Chinia and several SWAT members and searched the rooms on the 3rd floor with them. The layout of this building was somewhat similar to that of some university dormitories in the east. There was a long corridor inside the building, and the houses of residents or families were on the north and south sides. Chinia held her weapon and leaned close to Ron to examine carefully. She whispered as she walked, Ron, do you think that Erneston guy ran to the 3rd floor? It's possible. Hearing Chinia's question, Ron whispered, Erneston is a killer. This guy can't commit suicide. The explosion just now could be that he wanted to erase some clues or to divert our attention. Before this operation, Ron had sent someone to get the format layout of this building. Through observation, it was found that there was no suitable way to escape from the roof of this building unless the other party didn't care about his life and dared to play a low altitude parachuting below the 8th floor. There were SWAT members waiting on the street, and they would shoot if the enemy dared to jump. Since this way was not feasible, Luo An thought from the killer's perspective, and found that the best way was to detonate the bomb, to attract the attention of the SWAT members, quickly run to the 3rd or 2nd floor, and then find a way to leave. But there were already SWAT members on the 2nd floor, so the only place the enemy could go was the 3rd floor. After listening to the explanation, Chinia nodded slightly. What Luo An said made sense, but there was also a problem. There were so many residents on the 3rd floor, and it was impossible to determine whether the people in each room were working or resting at home at this time. Thinking of this, Chinia frowned slightly and whispered, Ron, we. Chinia didn't finish her words. The early warning brought by the danger perception potion made Ron's face change. He suddenly reached out and grabbed Chinia's arm and pressed her to the ground. At the same time, he shouted to the SWAT team members, get down. Boom, 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 boom. The next second, 4 deafening explosions suddenly erupted not far from Ron and others. The doors of the 3 rooms were instantly blown to pieces. The orange-red flames and black-gray fragrant smoke instantly submerged several SWAT members. Fortunately, Ron reminded them in time, and the reaction speed of several SWAT members was fast enough. They were lying on the ground, but their clothes were only burned by the flames. One team member's head with a helmet was hit by a piece of wood. Other than that, they were fine. Motherfucker. Chinia quickly got up from the ground and cursed at the mess in front of her. What a lunatic. Turning her head to look at Ron, she found that Ron quickly ran to another room that was not destroyed by the bomb, kicked open the door, and rushed into the house. Chinia followed closely and ran into the room and found that Ron was standing at the door of the bathroom in this room. The wall behind the toilet had been blown open, and there was a big black hole inside. Seeing the sparks splashing from time to time on the lines around the wall of the big hole, Chinya quickly reacted, looked at Roan with admiration, and analyzed. The fourth explosion just now turned out to be here. This is the elevator shaft. Is that guy Erneston going to go down the elevator shaft to the first floor to escape? No, he should go to the underground parking lot of this building. Roan shook his head and pulled off a sheet from the bed in the bedroom of the room. Under the puzzled gazes of the SWAT team members and Chinya, Roan wrapped the sheet while pressing the communicator and shouted, "Winslow, Lassie, take people to the underground parking lot. Mona, check the surveillance video of the underground parking lot. Is there any situation?" Winslow and Lassie quickly responded and led people to the underground garage. Mona quickly tapped the keyboard with her 10 fingers and then said urgently, "There are 2 surveillance cameras in the underground parking lot and they were just broken." "Okay, I got it." The sheet was wrapped and Roan turned his head to the SWAT team members behind him and said, "You guys hurry to the underground parking lot. Remember to take the stairs." Several SWAT team members nodded, turned around quickly, and prepared to leave. Chinya frowned slightly. "What about us? Hold on to me." Roan grinned, stretched out his left hand, and grabbed Chinya's waist, swung the prepared sheet with his right hand, tied the steel cable in the elevator shaft, and jumped directly into the dark bottom of the cave with Chinya. Holy shit. Jesus. Seeing this scene, several SWAT team members were shocked. They looked at each other, said a few federal exclamations and curse words, and quickly left the room, and ran down the stairs to the underground parking lot. In the dark elevator shaft, Chanel hugged Roan with a tense face. She found that she had greatly underestimated Roan's style and courage. The location of the elevator in the underground parking lot and the open top of the elevator proved that Roan's guess was correct. The escape route of this guy Erneston was indeed the underground parking lot. The rope made of bed sheets was of average quality and was quickly cut into 2 pieces by the elevator cable. But Roan was not in a hurry, because at the moment when the bed sheets were cut, he just arrived above the elevator with Chanel. Roan stepped lightly on the top cover of the elevator, threw the broken bed sheets aside, loosened his hand around Chanel's waist, and sent her into the elevator. Then he jumped into the elevator, walked out of the elevator door, and entered the underground parking lot, and tidied up his hair that was blown by the breeze. Chanel's mind was in a mess after seeing this scene. She opened her mouth, but didn't know what to say. After a pause, she took a deep breath and carefully observed her surroundings with her weapons. At this time, Winslow, Lassie and several SWAT team members also rushed out from the stairs not far away on the other side. Without hesitation, they immediately dispersed with their weapons in hand. At the same time, Winslow shouted, "Look carefully under the car and the trunk of the car. The target person is definitely here." Holding the weapon and searching quickly forward, Winslow was stunned when he saw Roan and Chanel. The SWAT team members who followed Roan before had not yet reached the underground parking lot. How could Roan and Chanel go downstairs so quickly? "Did you take the elevator down?" Chinya rolled her eyes and shook her head. "No, I jumped down the elevator shaft." Winslow and Chinya both looked at each other strangely. Roan quickly walked to the broken surveillance video that Mona had mentioned before and looked around carefully. He suddenly pressed the communicator and asked, "Mona, when will the nearest subway arrive at the nearby station?" "It is expected to arrive in 6 minutes. Mona on the other end of the communicator tapped on the keyboard a few times and quickly answered Roan's question, and then asked, "Why do you ask that?" Winslow and Chinya also came over at this time. Roan pointed to the grid drain outlet under the wall not far away and said coldly, "I'm afraid that guy Erneston escaped from here to the subway station." Chapter 471. Sewer, Platform Fight, Suspension News. The SWAT team and the Special Investigation Team were located at this time was one of the older ones. The underground parking lot, sewer pipes, and subways all had connections that ordinary people were not aware of. Luo An realized this. He had been thinking about the reason why Erneston went to the underground parking lot. Judging from the 2 entrances and exits of the underground parking lot and the several staircases and elevators, that place was a dead place. But if you focus on the drainage system of the underground parking lot, then Erneston has sufficient reasons. In addition to the root of the broken surveillance camera discovered by Mona, and the traces of the grid drain being twisted, and the missing screws in front of him, Luo An can be 100% sure that Ineston left the underground parking lot from here. Son of Eat. Motherfucker. After listening to Luo An's words, Winslow and Chinia also quickly thought of this. After all, the SWAT members in the underground parking lot said that they did not find anything. The faces of the two suddenly became uglier. Winslow, Lassie, take your people to the nearby subway station. If there is an emergency, block the area completely. Roan snorted coldly, bent down and pulled open the grid drain, and then said, Chinel, you and I will start from here to catch people. The space in the drain was not large. Chinel's body was easy to enter, and Roan could barely squeeze in. Winslow was too strong, and couldn't get in at all. Understood. Winslow nodded heavily and quickly took Lassie and the SWAT team members to the nearby subway station. Walking forward along the narrow drain, Roan and Chinel entered a sewer pipe not far away. Although the sewer pipe exuded an indescribable odor, under the illumination of the gun headlight, Roan and Chinel clearly saw the traces left by someone walking in front. Chinia looked at Roan with admiration and pointed to the traces of sewage splashing not far away. It seems that this guy Ineston did leave from here. Roan narrowed his eyes slightly, nodded and said nothing, then walked forward, using the emotional perception in his mind to check the situation ahead. The sewer pipes are connected in all directions. Roan and Chinia followed the traces on the ground, and after several turns, they suddenly walked out of the sewer and arrived at a house built between several huge metal pipes. This kind of house is a maintenance room for subway workers. Chinia quickly broke into the room and did not see Ineston, but only saw a few pieces of clothes thrown on the ground that exuded a strange smell. Obviously, these were the clothes that Ineston had prepared before, and he had just walked out of the sewer and quickly changed here. Damn it. Chinia stepped hard on the clothes on the ground. Her face was very ugly. She did not expect Ineston to be so fast. Luo An's face was not angry at all, and even the corners of his mouth slightly raised. He grabbed Chinia and walked out, saying as he walked, "Stop cursing. The nearby subway station is 300 meters to the left of this house, and there are still 4 minutes before the subway arrives. Let's go there to catch people." Chinia subconsciously followed Luo An and ran towards the subway station, but still didn't understand why Luo An judged that he must have gone to the subway station. "I wasn't sure before, but now I see these clothes, I'm sure." Luo An said that, since Ineston changed his clothes, it means that he didn't plan to continue to escape from the sewer. The reason for changing new clothes is probably because he didn't want to attract the attention of passers-by and law enforcement officers. The place with the most passers-by nearby is the subway station not far away. The distance of 300 meters is nothing to Luo An and Chinia, and the two quickly ran to the subway platform. At this time, nearly 100 people have gathered on this platform. In the astonished eyes of passers-by, Luo An, who exudes a strange smell all over his body, jumped from the rails to the subway platform and quickly walked to the other side of the platform. Chinia, who was on the railroad track, saw this scene and twitched his mouth. He quickly climbed onto the platform and carefully scanned every passerby around him. Bang, 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 ah, help. Suddenly, 3 gunshots rang out in succession not far ahead. A group of passers-by quickly bent down, covered their heads, screamed, and dodged. Chinia quickly looked up at the location where the gunshots came from and found that Roan had already started fighting with a man with a violin case. Ineston, who was wearing a brown leather jacket, jeans, and glasses on his face, looked at Roan with shock. Ineston didn't understand how Roan found him. Roan had just walked straight towards him. Not only that, Ineston secretly took out a pistol, aimed at Roan, and pulled the trigger, but he never expected that Roan seemed to have anticipated his move and actually dodged his bullet to the left in advance, and pounced on him like a cheetah. Fouquet. Ineston leaned back and quickly dodged the fist that appeared in front of him. He took out a dagger and fought back, and asked with a ferocious face, "Where the hell are you from?" Luo An grinned, dodged the dagger flashing with cold light, grabbed Ineston's arm, and said coldly, "Very good, Mr. Ineston, you now have another charge of defamation." While chasing Ineston all the way, Luo An always opened up the emotional perception in his mind. Arriving at this subway platform, passers-by saw Luo An wearing an FBI bulletproof vest, and they felt curious, confused, and disgusted about him. But the cold and unconcealed desire to kill Luo An was only from Erneston, who was holding a violin case, so Luo An immediately locked onto him. TSK. Swish, a flash of cold light, the clothes on Roan's shoulders were instantly cut open by the dagger in Erneston's hand. At the same time, Roan snatched the pistols hidden in Erneston's hands and waist, and then kicked Erneston hard in the stomach. Bang, a huge force came from the stomach, and Erneston flew out instantly, and hit the square pillar of the subway platform heavily. Don't move. Throw away the weapon. Chinia also ran here at this time. She raised the pistol, and stared at Erneston, saying sternly, put your hands behind your head. Lie on the ground. Hehe. Erneston, who was leaning against the square pillar, spit out a mouthful of blood, looked at Chinia coldly, raised his hand to wipe the blood from his mouth, grinned a few times, and then suddenly rushed towards a passerby girl not far away. Bang, bang, bang. Chinia fired without hesitation, hitting the girl with all 3 shots, but Erneston still gritted his teeth and endured the pain, running to the side of the terrified white girl. Erneston no longer had the idea of counter-killing in his mind. Firstly, because Chinia appeared, there were 2 people on the other side, and he was not at an advantage with 2 against 1. Secondly, Erneston found that he could not beat the male FBI. After the fight just now, Erneston found that the male FBI was not only better than him, but also firmly suppressed him. Moreover, he didn't know what the guy ate to grow up. He looked average, but his strength was extraordinary. When the 2 of them fought just now, Erneston was stunned by Roan's fist. If it weren't for the dagger in his hand, Erneston felt that he might not be able to hold on until now. Catch this hostage and leave here. Erneston stretched out his right hand towards the girl's neck with a ferocious face. He also had a dagger in his hand. There were so many passers-by at the scene. Erneston believed that the 2 FBI in front of him would never dare to ignore the safety of the hostage in front of so many people. The next second, Erneston suddenly felt a gust of wind in his right ear, and before he could react, a familiar fist appeared in front of him. Bang! Roan moved to the girl's side like lightning, and punched Erneston in the face. A mouthful of blood mixed with teeth spurted out, and Erneston only felt a black screen in front of his eyes, and then he completely lost consciousness. Chinel, handcuff him, and don't forget to call an ambulance. Roan picked up the young girl, who was so scared that her body was limp, and answered the phone that had been ringing since just now. What's wrong? As soon as the voice fell, Lass's anxious voice suddenly rang on the other end of the phone. Roan, I just received a message that the team leader Potent Burn has been suspended. Chapter 472, a bigger hidden story behind the case. South of Los Angeles, on a subway station platform, nearly 100 passers-by stood on both sides, forming 2 human walls, all with their eyes fixed on the 2 men and women wearing FBI bulletproof vests, especially Roan, who was on the phone. The scene of Roan hitting Erneston with his fists just now made many men present widen their eyes in shock. The women present were more excited than the men. The scene of Roan moving in front of Erneston like a cheetah and knocking him unconscious with 1 punch caused many women to scream. Looking at Roan's handsome face, the younger girls present wished they could replace him and become the blonde woman in Roan's arms. The more mature women present had already begun to move quietly to Roan and Chinia, preparing to find a way to get Roan's contact information. Chinia. Luo An ignored the gazes of passers-by. He was more concerned about what Lassie had just said on the phone. He asked in a serious voice, what happened to Potent Burn's suspension? Can you find out the details? Sorry, I can't find out. Lassie looked a little anxious. She had just heard this news from someone inside the FBI in Los Angeles. It was confirmed to be true, but she didn't know what happened specifically. At this moment, Chinia, who had just handcuffed Erneston, suddenly heard the phone in her pocket ring. Chinia pressed the answer button, and her face instantly became serious when she heard the voice inside. Then she looked up at Roan and said, Roan, this is for you. Roan frowned slightly, put the blonde girl in his arms gently on the ground, walked to Chinia, and whispered, who? Chinia didn't make a sound, but just made a mouth shape. Director. Seeing this, Roan's mind instantly became full of thoughts, but on the surface his expression remained unchanged. He took Chinia's phone coughed lightly, and said, "This is Roan. I'm the director of the FBI Los Angeles branch." A serious voice of a man who was not particularly unfamiliar to Roan came from the other end of the phone. The director of the branch said without any nonsense, "The scene will be handed over to the members of the special investigation team to deal with. You should return to the branch building and come to my office immediately." "Okay, director." After getting an affirmative answer, the director of the branch hung up the phone directly. Roan narrowed his eyes slightly, handed the phone back to Chinya, pondered for a few seconds, and whispered, "Chinell, you will escort Ineston to the hospital with Winslow, Lassie and others. In addition, I need you to do something." Roan whispered a few words in Chinell's ear. Chinell was silent for a few seconds and just nodded heavily. "Good." Patting Chinell on the shoulder, the ambulance and Winslow and others arrived at the scene a few minutes later. Roan immediately drove alone and returned to the FBI Los Angeles branch building first. Nassim Hernandez, the director of the FBI Los Angeles branch, is a white male with a slightly fat body and is 63 years old this year. This is not the first time Roan has met the director of the branch. When investigating the First Lady auction bombing, 2 bombs were placed in a villa in Bev Hills. The director of the branch was also at the cocktail party at that time. Chapter 231. After Roan successfully resolved the bomb crisis, the director of the branch took the opportunity to introduce Roan to the identities of the guests at the banquet, and his words were full of praise for Roan. Arriving at the director's office, Luo An knocked on the door and pushed it open after getting permission. "Good evening, director." "Good evening. Come here and sit down." Behind the desk, the branch director raised his head and smiled slightly, waved to Luo An, and motioned Luo An to sit on the chair in front of his desk. After a few simple greetings, the branch director asked directly, "You have led the team to catch the murderer who killed Lyndon Osborne's family, right?" "Yes, director." "Very good." After receiving Luo An's affirmative answer, the branch director nodded with satisfaction, then took out a folded paper from the desk and handed it to Luo An, saying at the same time, "Pot and burn is temporarily suspended. As long as no problems are found after the review, he will return to his original position." Luo An's expression did not change after hearing this, and he did not say much. He silently opened the paper and checked it. At the top of the paper was a long list of English names. Luo An roughly counted and found that there were about 30 people. Below the names of the 30 people were the words written by the former team leader Lyndon Osborne before his death. The content of the text is not complicated. Before the former team leader Lyndon Osborne officially retired, when he was leading a case, the undercover he sent out was discovered by the enemy leader for some reason and was brutally killed. The enemy leader was also accidentally killed by a stray bullet during the FBI's subsequent operation. The exposure and killing of undercover agents happens every year. Lyndon Osborne, as usual, expressed his apologies to the relatives of the undercover agents and gave some compensation. After sitting in the position of team leader for so many years, Lyndon Osborne has become a little indifferent and accustomed to such things. Later, when sorting out the undercover's life materials, Lyndon Osborne suddenly found something wrong. It's a bit cruel to say that for the undercover work, the FBI has a death index every year after the undercover is discovered. The significance of this index is to judge the job evaluation of the management personnel who sent out the undercover through the number of undercover deaths each year. The index is evaluated every 6 months. After carefully comparing the cases where other team supervisors and other managers of the same level needed to send out undercover agents, Lyndon Osborne discovered that, for unknown reasons, undercover agents were killed by criminal leaders after their true identities were discovered, and then the leaders of criminal organizations died for various reasons every year. Lyndon Osborne did not think much about it at first, thinking it was just a coincidence, but later, as he investigated in depth, he discovered a strange phenomenon. If the number of deaths of undercover agents sent out by a management staff member that year was still a long way from the undercover death index number stipulated each year, then the undercover agents sent out by this management staff member next will 100% have their true identities exposed for unknown reasons and be killed by the leader of the criminal gang. The criminal leader who killed this undercover agent will also die strangely for various reasons later. On the contrary, if the number of deaths of undercover agents sent out by a management staff member that year has exceeded the undercover death index, then the undercover agents sent out by this management staff in a certain case next will have 60% chance of surviving smoothly, but the undercover agent's identity will not be exposed inexplicably. Lyndon Osborne also discovered that these undercover deaths occurred to 1 to 2 management figures every year, 1 to 2 times, and each time was 5 to 6 months apart. 1 time was an accident, 2 times were coincidences, so what was the 3rd time? Moreover, this type of case has reached double digits, spanning more than 6 years. Looking at the situation he had found out, Lyndon Osborne's face changed drastically, and he felt creepy all over his body. The only explanation he could think of was that there was a cautious and cunning inside the FBI Los Angeles branch, who repeatedly exposed his undercover identity, and whose status was definitely not low. After tossing and turning for a long time, Lyndon Osborne finally reported his findings to Nassim Hernandez, the director of the FBI Los Angeles branch. Just in case, Lyndon Osborne secretly told Potent Byrne before reporting the matter to the director. Because Potent Byrne and Lyndon Osborne have a good relationship, Potent Byrne has been in the FBI Los Angeles branch for less than 2 years and has been active outside the Federation before. He is definitely not the mastermind behind this case. If something happens to him, Lyndon Osborne also believes that Potent Byrne is absolutely capable of investigating the truth of this case and avenging him. After reading the contents of the paper, Luo An's eyebrows jumped, and he had only one thought in his heart: undercover work is really a big bit. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 473, The Director's Arrangement, Potent Byrne's Role. The Federation is a country that advocates individual heroism. When fighting a certain red giant, the Federation people did not understand why the agents of that country refused to betray the federal agents who thought that these people were brainwashed, even when they were tortured to death. Instead, they began to study the mysticism that can control people's minds, and selectively ignored the importance of faith. Because of the lack of faith and persistence, and the focus on personal interests, there are countless law enforcement personnel who defect or turn evil in the Federation every year, and it is impossible to check them all. When the enemy is cruel and ruthless, the boss may not be reliable. Even if the boss is reliable, the boss's boss may not be reliable. Being an undercover with an uncertain future, Luo An stepped directly into the trash can. Putting the paper back on the desk, Director Nassim crossed his hands, looked at Luo An, and said seriously, "I was also shocked by Lyndon Osborne's discovery." Luo An's expression did not change when he heard this. On that paper, Lyndon Osborne had suggested to Director Nassim to conduct a purge of the senior executives in the FBI branch building. But Director Nassim did not implement this plan. Rohn thought about the reason. Compared with Lyndon, Director Nassim considered more. The building of the FBI Los Angeles branch looks like a strict barrier, but it is actually a big sieve with loopholes. Except for some highly confidential information, ordinary information cannot be concealed. Once a large-scale investigation is launched, it is likely that this matter will be published in the Los Angeles News in a few hours, and the whole Federation will know it in a day. With such a big scandal exposed, it is uncertain whether Nassim's position as the director of the branch is stable. Director Nassim then told Rohn that he had given the task of finding the insider to Lyndon for secret investigation. After all, Lyndon has retired in name, so it is easier to hide his true situation. But he never expected that the murderer was so cruel that Lyndon and his wife died directly in the explosion. Rohn was silent. He thought of some other aspects. For example, Lyndon could be sure that Potent Byrne was not the mastermind behind this case, and Director Nassim could not have thought of it. Suspending Potent Byrne for investigation is most likely a way for Director Nassim to protect him. It not only allows other people to shift their attention away from the relationship between Potent Byrne and the Lyndon family's death, but also prepares for Potent Byrne to lead the investigation of this case and find the insider in the future. As expected, Director Nassim raised his hand to fold the paper on the table and said that Roan would lead the special investigation team to investigate this case carefully. The length of time is not important. The important thing is that they must not attract too much attention and at the same time pay attention to their own safety and find out the truth. I understand, Director. Roan nodded with a grin. He understood what Director Nassim meant, put keeping secrets and not attracting attention first. There is no need to rush the investigation of the case. Roan's level is still too low. Later, Potent Burn, a tall man in the management, will come out to lead them to solve the case. The current priority of the special investigation team is to ensure their own safety. Good. Director Nassim nodded with satisfaction, then simply praised Roan's performance some time ago, and then handed Roan a file, which contained an opportunity to go to Quantico for further study. One more thing. Just as Roan was about to get up and leave, Director Nassim suddenly handed Roan another folder, indicating that Horst from the inspection department was temporarily transferred to the special investigation team by him. Chapter 310. Okay. Roan raised his eyebrows. The mastermind behind this case must not be someone in the special investigation team, and Horst did not need to monitor the special investigation team's every move. That person was obviously sent to do protection work. After all, the mastermind dared to kill Lyndon Osborne with a bomb. Who knows if the other party will attack someone in the special investigation team. Once the special investigation team encounters an emergency, Horst from the inspection department can quickly contact Director Nassim for help. Walking out of the director's office, Roan looked at the folder in his hand. His brows relaxed, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Since according to Director Nassim's arrangement, the follow-up investigation of this case will be in the charge of team leader Potent Burn, Roan is not in a hurry. At present, Roan has led the team to catch the murderer of Lyndon Osborne, and their contributions will definitely be indispensable afterwards. In addition, the situation behind this case is complicated, involving senior executives higher than the team leader. It is naturally the best choice to wait for Potent Burn to come out and investigate later. In the future, whether it is merit or demerit, according to the habit of the FBI, to investigate layer by layer, it will naturally be Potent Burn's business. Taking the elevator back to the special investigation team, Roan called Chenia while changing clothes. How is the interrogation going? Because he didn't know what the situation was with Director Nassim beforehand, and the case might be snatched away, Roan asked Chenia and Winslow to secretly take the killer, in Eston, to another hospital, before returning to the FBI Los Angeles branch building to prevent other investigation teams from snatching him away. Chanel followed Luo An's instructions. After Ernest had the surgery in the hospital, she and Winslow started the interrogation directly, not giving Ernest a chance to rest. Sorry, it's almost there. Chanel frowned on the other end of the phone. Ernest was very stubborn and refused to cooperate, no matter what the two said. Okay, I'll be there right away. Luo An frowned slightly, picked up the coffee, and drank it all. Not long after, Horst from the supervision department came here. Luo An didn't waste time talking to him, and took him to the hospital directly. Are you interrogating the murderer? Hearing what Chenia and Winslow were doing, Horst, who was dressed in a suit and had a serious face, frowned and said in a serious voice, the director's order is that this case will be handed over to the team leader Potent to lead the investigation afterwards. Yes, that's right. Roan turned the steering wheel and drove the SUV into another street, and replied with a smile, but even if the team leader Potent starts the investigation, the first step must be to interrogate Erneston, who was captured by us. This kind of work will definitely still be done by our special investigation team in the future. Since there is no change before and after, what's the problem with our interrogation now? Horst, with a serious face, was silent for a few seconds, because what Roan said made a lot of sense, and he couldn't think of a reason to refute it. Roan looked at Horst calmly, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. The SUV soon arrived at the hospital, where the murderer Erneston was, and parked the car on the side of the road. Roan gave Horst a thumbs up. Horst was the first person who sat in Roan's car for the first time, and his expression did not change from beginning to end. After entering the hospital and arriving at the ward where Erneston was, Chenia and Winslow were standing at the door of the ward waiting for Roan. This is Horst from the supervision department. Roan briefly introduced the identities of the three people. Horst still had a serious expressionless face, while Winslow and Chanel's hearts skipped a beat. The supervision department did not represent a good role in their minds, and they did not understand why the other party was here. Because the case was special, Roan did not explain in detail to Winslow and Chanel. He first took out his mobile phone and called Mona, asking her, Michelle and Lassie to come to the hospital, and then pushed open the door of the ward and walked in. "Good evening, Mr. Aneston, who was shot 3 times by my men." Luo An took a chair and sat next to the bed. Looking at Aneston, who was handcuffed to the bed, he smiled and asked, "How do you feel? Are you used to living here?" "Fuku. MOHTERFU-KER-%***. Seeing Luo An's face, Aneston's face turned red instantly, and the voice of the federal greeting suddenly echoed loudly in the room. However, because several teeth were knocked out by Luo An's previous punch, Aneston's speech was a little leaky, and his accent was heavy, so Luo An didn't hear a word of the greetings at the end. Luo An didn't care about the other party's greetings. He smiled and took out a few photos of men from his pocket. Seeing the photos, Aneston suddenly stopped insulting, and after a long silence, he stared at Luo An viciously and asked in a firm voice, "What do you want to do?" Chapter 474, Interrogation, Hit Broker, New Corpse. In a hospital ward in southern Los Angeles. On the bed in the middle of the ward, there lay a white man with many bandages wrapped around his body, a bruised face, and several missing teeth. Next to the bed, Roan sat on a chair with a smile on his face. Horst from the supervision department stood against the wall behind Roan with his hands folded across his chest. Winslow and Chenia stood in front of the bed. Seeing the photos in Roan's hand, Aneston's face instantly became very ugly. In several photos, there were men, all wearing prison uniforms. Their looks could not be said to be ugly, but they had their own characteristics, and they were attractive at first sight. When Aneston was in prison before, he had conflicts with these people that were difficult to resolve, but at that time, another boss protected Aneston, so Aneston was able to get out of prison smoothly. Now the boss who protected Aneston has also left the prison. Aneston is indeed agile, but those guys in the prison are numerous and powerful, and Aneston cannot be on guard against sneak attacks every minute and every second. Once he returns to the prison, how long Aneston can live will definitely become a game of betting among the prison guards. These photos were found by Mona when she was investigating Aneston's identity information. Luo An didn't expect that they would come in handy at this time. Luo An poured himself a glass of water and drank it all. Then he looked at Aneston with a smile and said, "It seems that you don't want to die yet." "Nonsense." Aneston stared at Luo An viciously. As a killer, he didn't have much worldly sense of morality, but his own life was definitely the thing he valued most. If he was alive, there was still hope, but if he died, there would be nothing. "I believe you still remember these old friends in prison, and I think they must remember you too." Roan threw the photos in his hand onto the bed, then crossed his legs, leaned back on the chair, and said with a smile, "Tell me who is the mastermind behind the order to kill you. Or, you can be stubborn and say nothing, and then you can go back to this familiar prison and chat with these old friends." Looking at the photos on his chest, Enz looked at Roan with his eyes blazing, biting his back teeth and said, "You are such an excellent FBI. Thank you for the compliment." Roan laughed, and Enz killed Lyndon Osborne and his wife with a bomb, and disemboweled Lyndon's son. He had also ambushed the special investigation team and the SWAT team with a bomb before. If Roan hadn't reacted quickly, no one knew how many people would have died in that operation. For this kind of evil guy, Roan directly gave up the idea of whispering to him about the deal, and the most effective way was to directly present the facts and talk about threats. After a long silence, Aneston grabbed all the photos and threw them on the ground. He looked at the ceiling and said, "I also want to tell you who is behind the order, but I don't know, because I have never seen that person." Luo An's expression did not change, and he continued to ask, "Then tell us what you know." Aneston said that he was a traditional killer and had always made money by taking orders through traditional middlemen. Since he was short of money, after being released from prison, Aneston found a middleman he was familiar with and had a good reputation in the industry, and then took the order. "Good. Luo An nodded with satisfaction. What is the name of this middleman? I always call him Vincent. Ineston said a name, but he didn't know whether the name was true or false, and he never cared about it in the past. Ineston then provided the other party's contact information, the location of each time they contacted, and the other party's appearance and other information. Not long after, Mona, Michelle and Lassie arrived here. With the suspect's portrait, Mona quickly found the suspect, Sean Hoffman, 39 years old. He opened a private detective agency called Guaranteed to Meet Your Requirements. He is the only boss and the only employee of the detective agency. This name. I think he should go to work in an advertising company. Looking at the information found in Mona's computer, Lassie complained speechlessly, and Roan waved his hand. Winslow, Lassie, Chanel, you come with me, and go to catch people. Understood. X3 looking at Roan and the other 4 people walking quickly. Horst, who was standing by the side, had trembling eyelids, and moved his lips a few times, but thought about it, and didn't say anything, and hurriedly followed. In the southeast of Los Angeles, a small villa community dominated by the middle class. The SUV quickly stopped at the side of the road. Roan and Lassie quickly moved to the front door of the villa where Sean Hoffman lived, and Winslow and Chanel moved to the back door of the villa. Both parties arrived at the designated location. After counting down to 3, Roan suddenly kicked the front door of the villa, and Winslow followed closely, and kicked the back door of the villa. Bang bang. 2 sounds of the doors being kicked open were heard one after another. Lassie and Chenia quickly rushed into the villa and shouted, FBI. Sean Hoffman. Come out. The villa was not big, but not small either. There were many rooms and a basement. Roan and the other 4 shouted, while quickly checking each room. The first floor is safe. The basement is safe. Lassie shouted immediately, there is a discovery on the second floor. What? The target person is dead. Hearing Lassie's shout, Winslow and Chenia hurried to the bedroom on the second floor. In the bedroom, a white man wearing a shirt and casual large flowered shorts was shot in the middle of his forehead. He lay on the big bed with his eyes wide open, staring straight at Lassie, Chenia, and Winslow at the door of the bedroom. Fouquet. The 3 put away their guns. Chanel cursed under her breath. Winslow walked to the body and took a closer look. He looked up and said, we are a step too late. This guy should have been dead for 2 or 3 days. Lassie nodded and turned to ask, where is Roan? He's in the basement. Chanel took out her cell phone to call the trace examination department while walking down the stairs with Winslow and Lassie. The 3 walked down the stairs into the basement, where there was a room with photos on the walls. At this time, Roan was standing beside a square desk in the middle of the room. Seeing the light shining on his side, Roan continued to organize things and asked without raising his head, what did you find? Sean Hoffman is dead. Lassie briefly described the situation on the second floor and then casually pulled a photo from the wall, looked at the beautiful woman with her back to the camera in the photo, frowned slightly and said, it seems that we have found a stalker. This is the work content of a private detective. Chanel and Winslow stepped forward to help organize the photos on the table. Roan continued, and Sean Hoffman is not an ordinary private detective. These things on the table show that he has handled many divorce cases and clients with secrets. I'm afraid he has made a lot of money from the hush money. A hint of contempt flashed in Lassie's eyes. She put the photo back on the wall and asked, Roan, why don't you feel anything about the news that Sean Hoffman is dead? I have guessed that there is such a possibility. Before coming to the villa to arrest people, Roan put himself in the murderer's shoes and thought about the murderer's position. Killing Sean Hoffman and erasing all traces of his existence is a very cost-effective method for the murderer. After packing up the laptop computer, a bunch of eavesdropping equipment and a bunch of tapes he found, Roan handed one to Lassie and explained, our trip is not without gain. Sean Hoffman has been a private detective and killer broker for so many years. He definitely has his own unique way of storing information. There are no signs of this villa being searched, which means that this information is most likely still in the room. If we find and crack this information, we should be able to know who is the mastermind behind the murder of the Linden family by ordering Sean Hoffman. It sounds like a very difficult and time-consuming job. Lassie sighed. Winslow and Chenia looked at each other and were ready to work overtime for the next few days. Suddenly, Horst from the supervision department shouted at the door of the basement, Team Leader Greenwood, there is a call for you. Chapter 475, Clues to the Deceased, Investigation, and the Discoveries of the Detectives. Taking the phone handed over by Horst from the inspection department, a familiar male voice suddenly sounded on the other end of the phone. It's me, Potent Bine. Good evening, sir. Luo An glanced at Horst calmly and asked with a smile. It sounds like the sir is in good condition. Indeed. In a large interrogation room of the inspection department of the FBI Los Angeles branch, Potent Bine looked at the Coke hamburger meal on the table in front of him, chuckled, and did not talk much about this topic. He asked directly, what has the special investigation team found in this case? We just found the killer broker, and the person is dead. Luo An briefly described the situation at the scene. Potent Bine was silent for a few seconds after listening, and said, you did a good job. In the next 5 days, the special investigation team must pay more attention to safety. I understand, sir. A gleam of light flashed in Luo An's eyes. He understood the meaning of Potent Bine's words. After 5 days, the other party would leave the inspection department and come out to lead the special investigation team to handle this case secretly. Good. Potent Bine nodded with satisfaction and chatted briefly with Roan about other matters and then hung up the phone. Roan handed the phone back to Horst. Not long after, several agents from the trace examination department also arrived at the scene. After dealing with the findings at the scene, they returned to the FBI Los Angeles branch building together. The next day, at 11 AM, the office area of the special investigation team. Because the overtime last night was a bit long, with Roan's permission, the agents of the special investigation team took a good rest for a few hours and came to work at around 11 o'clock. This is another reason why Winslow and Cheney are like the special investigation team. The working hours are very flexible. Other ordinary investigation teams in the FBI Los Angeles branch do not have this privilege. First, there are many agents in those investigation teams. If one agent takes a temporary break, other agents can take over. Second, the special investigation team is a temporary setting. In many cases, the special investigation team is the one-man show of the team leader. Some rules are not mandatory for the special investigation team. Because of this, he went home late last night, but he went to work at the FBI Los Angeles branch building at 8 o'clock this morning. He waited until 11 o'clock before he saw Horst from the inspection department, who was accompanied by Luo An and others. He took a deep breath, rubbed his sore eyes, and suppressed his dissatisfaction and swearing. After a good rest for several hours, Luo An, who was full of energy, patted Horst on the shoulder, handed him a bag of breakfast, lunch, and smiled. Thank you for your hard work. Horst stared at Luo An for a moment with a serious face, and then took the food. Thank you. Luo An laughed and raised his hand to point to the sofa in the right rear corner of the special investigation team's office area, indicating that Horst could go there to rest. Wait a minute. Horst frowned when he heard this, grabbed Luo An, who was about to turn around and leave, and asked in a serious voice, what is your special investigation team's work plan today? Work plan? What plan? Luo An blinked, not understanding what Horst meant. Horst said that the supervision department has a corresponding work plan every day. That is, what work needs to be completed every day, and whether it is completed or not corresponds to different evaluation criteria. It is not easy for you people in the supervision department to persist until now. After listening to the other party's explanation, Luo An's mouth twitched. He understood where Horst's meticulous work style came from. My special investigation team has no work plan. When investigating a case, no one knows what will happen in the next second. Luo An was too lazy to discuss this issue with Horst. He finished his lunch in a few bites and got up and walked into the office area of the special investigation team. Good afternoon, everyone. Luo An walked to the whiteboard at the front of the special investigation team's office area and posted the photos of the killer Ernest and the broker and private detective Sean Hoffman on the whiteboard. Then he turned around and looked at Michelle first and asked, how is the autopsy of the trace examination department going? Autopsy is a very complicated job. There are many aspects to be written in the formal report, and it takes a very long time. However, many times, special investigation teams and other ordinary investigation teams will not wait for the formal autopsy report to be written, but will go directly to the trace examination department to inquire about the cause of death of the victim, the material found at the scene and other information, and then directly start the next step of the investigation. The specific report hasn't come out yet, but the cause of death has been determined. Hearing Roan's question, Michelle, who had previously gone to the trace examination department to get a handwritten brief report, stood up and answered. The cause of death of the victim seen Hoffman was the gunshot wound in the center of his forehead. Based on the broken pillow found at the scene, the trace examination department determined that the murderer put the pillow in front of the muzzle of the gun before shooting, using the pillow as a silencer. There were no signs of a break-in in the villa where the crime occurred, so the murderer is most likely someone seen Hoffman knew, or the two had met before. In addition, the ballistics test of the bullet that killed Seen Hoffman has also been completed. Unfortunately, there is no matching gun in the FBI's internal database. This is a newly appeared black gun. Roan then turned his gaze to the others, and Lassie stood up immediately afterwards, frowning and saying, "Based on the information found last night, I found the last thing Seen Hoffman investigated before his death. It was a divorce case. Seen Hoffman was commissioned by a financial institution boss to find evidence of his wife's infidelity. But Seen Hoffman took advantage of this opportunity to extort money and sex from the cheating wife of the financial institution boss. Son of, what a scumbag." After Lassie finished her narration, the other women present all cursed in a low voice with ugly faces. Winslow frowned and took a sip of coffee without saying anything. Seeing that no one else had found anything, Luo An clapped his hands and said, "Everyone, our next work is to investigate Seen Hoffman's life experience, who he had seen, what he had done, and what the surveillance around the villa showed. At the same time, carefully check the photos, tapes, discs, eavesdroppers, memory cards, laptops and other items in the villa, and try to find out who killed him. Understood?" X5 The 5 detectives answered in unison, and then immediately began to move their chairs back to their positions, and began to seriously investigate the clues according to Luo An's requirements. As for Seen Hoffman's whereabouts before his death, because of his identity as a private detective anti-detection technology, and the fact that he always used cash for his purchases, Mona and Michelle tried for a long time, but could not find any useful information, and sometimes they could not find any trace of him at all. However, in the discs, memory cards, and tapes in the villa, the special investigation team did get information beyond their imagination. Adultery, cheating, frame-ups, private lives of male and female stars, a lot of exciting content that would cause a carnival among reporters, as long as it was shown. After reading the information in her hand, Lassie's face was full of disgust. "I always thought that the rumors about a Hollywood actress and the president of a film and television company were fake, but I didn't expect it to be true." Chanel raised her head and said in surprise, "Are you still a fan?" "It's not a fan. I've just been attracted by the independent struggle image of that female star." Lassie put the disc aside and shook her head. "I knew that in a place like Hollywood, there would be no woman who became famous simply by her strength. Who knows?" Chanel replied casually and began to discuss with Lassie in a low voice. On the other side, Winslow looked at some information backups he found on the disc and said to Roan with emotion, "I really want to know how much money Seen Hoffman made from this information during his lifetime." Roan frowned slightly, and just as he stood up and was about to emphasize the confidentiality of this information to the detectives, Mona suddenly said with a strange look on her face, "Roan, I think I found the murderer of Seen Hoffman, and who is the mastermind behind this case." What? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.